In a world full of magic and enchantment, a lovely lady decided to confess her feelings to her prince. She drank before the confession to be brave. But looking at the man in front of her, she realized she had opened her heart to the wrong man. And here begins her exciting adventure of a lifetime. At the beginning of the story, before the irreparable mistake, Renee was very embarrassed, but still confessed her love to the man. She said she had long ago fallen in love with his beautiful smile. For a second, the girl was silent and thought, why the man doesn't say anything, and she felt very embarrassed. Renee thought that she had been drinking too much because she couldn't stand on her feet, but she was saved from an awkward fall by the guy. The guy's height and voice were a little different, and more importantly, the color of his hair. Renee realized the terrible truth. She had confessed to the wrong man. She had just revealed her feelings to a man she didn't love. Renee now couldn't find her place and wondered how this could have happened to her. It turned out that she was in this awkward situation with Cabell Willard, who is the commander of the Knights of the entire empire, as well as the heir to the Duchy of Willard. But more importantly, this evil man has a nickname and is called the Reaper of the Battlefield. She didn't know who was standing in front of her, so she made a huge mistake. The girl's story started with a girl who died in her past life. The circumstances were ordinary, and her consciousness was teleported to a magical dimension. The Reaper on the Battlefield, as he was called, and his real name was Cabell Willard, was a handsome guy, but cruel rumor has it. She did fall in love with someone else, and it was the Crown Prince and Commander of the Order of Holy Knights. His name was Elvin Keshmir, and his radiant smile always gave Renee hope. I wondered why her fate was tied to these two men. Elvin was the light of the empire, as well as a man worthy to bear the name of the most luminous man in the world. But Elvin's handsome face still hid the sinfulness of his soul. Returning to the events at the ball palace, Renee now found herself in an even worse situation, for Elwin had been kind to her, and Cabell had always been very strict. She must confess that she had mistaken this fellow for another before it was too late. But then Renee noticed a very beautiful sword hanging on the belt of the Knight Cabell. Renee realized she was drunk and was just talking nonsense. Her confession was meant for another guy. But the girl's thoughts are interrupted by Cabell and addresses her by name. Immediately, Renee saw the Reaper's radiant smile. The man politely asked Renee to call him by his first name from now on. The girl realized that from now on she could not change her fate. His lips, which had always been tightly compressed, smiled at her and spoke softly. The girl felt that if the Reaper had realized the truth of her false confession, he would have killed her on the spot. Long before the events of the confession to the Reaper, on one of the cold fall days, when the wind came from the south and brought the first cold weather, Renee asked her friend how she thought the client would arrive today. Renee kept referring to the Duke as the client, and couldn't dare to name his title completely, though her friend didn't like that hesitation. Renee explains with a smile that this Duke is indeed a client of their monastery. In fact, this man is the only client that funds their temple and gives them money to feed themselves. Lily hesitantly replies that if the high priest hears Renee say something like that, he might punish the girl, because the fact that the Duke comes to them is a secret. Renee waited for her client and was afraid to make another mistake because she knows the temper of the man. Renee has already died once, but she doesn't want it to happen again. That's why she was afraid of the terrible Duke. Some girls die tragically in accidents and wake up in the body of the villain of the novel, or fall into the body of a minor noblewoman. They can choose to live a quiet life despite the plot of the book, or they can win the heart of a minor character. Renee's case is very different from the one she mentioned. The heroine died on her way home. In her past life, she worked in the school library until late at night and was walking down a dark alley when she was struck by a car. After completing her task, Renee was like a zombie and was unable to avoid the collision. For Renee in her past life, work was more valuable than health. After death, when the heroine woke up for the first time, she was very hungry. Her clothes were tattered and Renee saw no one who could be her guardian. There was no one to help Renee. She didn't even have a home, and the body Renee possessed belonged to an orphan who didn't know her real name. She was unfortunately not a noblewoman, but a beggar without even food or clothes. It had been 4 days since the girl had entered the new world, but she hadn't been able to eat properly. Renee knew that most likely her new life would end quickly. Renee cried and asked God if she could go to heaven after such a sad life. But at some point, someone called out to Renee. It was as if a light filled the alley around her. Renee heard a man's voice asking if she was okay. The heroine was rescued by the temple workers. The guys said that the girl had been sick for several days, and the priest was able to take care of saving Renee's life. The girl did not realize at that time that priests can have magic with the help of which they help ordinary people. Although the heroine was an atheist in her past life, she still asked to stay in the temple and help with household chores. The priests agreed, and the girl grew up in the temple for the next 13 years. During this time, Renee learned that in the New World, gods actually exist, and that mages have healing powers. But unfortunately, there were problems, because the temple which got the girl was not very rich. All because this temple asked priests from other temples to come to them to help people, but their priests that could effectively treat this temple did not have. The ministers also educated orphans and provided them with free education, but in return, the children helped them with their chores. There were few orphans in this temple, and thanks to the funding, they never had to go hungry. The heroine befriended Lily when she and Lily were roommates, and they had known each other for 10 years. Renee lived a peaceful life, and soon passed her 17th winter. The priest told the girl that now she could go her own way if she wanted to, or she could stay. The temple doesn't get much money, so she could earn a lot more if she left the temple and started her own business. But still, the heroine did not think long and answered the priest that she wants to stay in the temple because the girl does not want to work hard, and the protection and care of the temple gives security and stability. She also learned that after coming of age, there is a rite of passage for temple workers. In the process, Renee realized that her choice to stay was too bad. Came the day of her baptism, the ritual of coming of age. Renee was told that the crystal ball used in the ritual could measure the level of divinity, but the problem was that Renee actually had powerful divine powers. Renee was stronger than number one of their temple, and her power was equal to that of the priests of the higher temples. The heroine realized that now that everyone around her knew about her power, no one would leave the girl alone on ordinary jobs anymore, and now she would have to help the temple as a rare healer. Now Renee could be used for different tasks to send her to the problematic places of the empire. The head priest of the temple kneeled before Renee and asked her to help earn more money for the temple and help people. But still, the girl's duties didn't go anywhere. She continued to work on a par with other priests, but still the heroine was difficult to hold back her tears. Lily told that today she would have to prepare a room for the Duke. Renee envied her and told her that the worst job one can do is to sit opposite the Duke, who is asleep. If you make the slightest sound, he can kill a girl with his big sword. A friend calms Renee down by telling her that the Duke is just a commander of Imperial Knights, and he is quite a good man if in such a big position. Lily wonders, does Renee really think that the Duke could kill a man out of annoyance? Even if the Duke is very important, he cannot kill a clergywoman from the temple without being punished. Renee realized that for a Duke to kill someone like her is too difficult and needs to think positively, so she thanks Lily for her friend to calm her down. When it started raining harder, the girls hurried to go to the temple so their clothes wouldn't get wet. The heroine recalls the episode when, late at night, she decided to light the extinguished candle on the table near the Duke's bed. The girl didn't expect the man to grab her palm. She had no time to react and dropped the match before she could light the candle. Then the Duke looked at her with a murderous look. And after this incident, it was very scary to fulfill his duties as a clergyman next to this guy that came to their temple for a healing session. Back to the story, when Renee arrived at the temple, she was still wet from the rain. The girl was shaking from the cold, but her clothes that were drying outside were clean. At some point, the head clergyman appears. He wishes good day and says that his dear Renee is wet and it is very bad. He asks that Lily change clothes with Renee before the guests arrive. Later, the father took Renee to his room to talk about something. At that moment, Renee did not understand what the priest wanted from her, but she assumed she'd probably be given a job. The clergyman looked at Renee intently. He asked the girl to listen to him carefully, but Renee didn't understand why her father was being so scary and interrupted him to ask him to hurry up. The man sighs and confesses. To be honest, he always sent Renee on assignments that were quite difficult. Renee wondered, had the priest known all along that she was having a hard time, but had done nothing to help Renee? Father says that now is the time when he will try to respect Renee's choices. The priest asks Renee if the girl knows where the kingdom of Vios is located. The girl remembered that it is the same small kingdom that is located south of the empire's border. She had learned geography when she was little and was cared for at the temple, Now that she thought about it, she remembered hearing that the kingdom's economy was not in the best of shape. Father frowned that it was a correct assumption, and this kingdom had declared war on the empire. In the past, their kingdoms had no reason to be in conflict. Therefore, the defense of the southern border was weakened, and the king's troops took advantage of this weakness and successfully attacked. The capital decided to give orders to suppress the opponents to the leader of the Paladin Knights, Elwyn and Duke Willard. The mentioned warriors are the high command of the empire. The father replies that the future campaign is not just an appeal to those who cross the border, and they are also considering the option of capturing the kingdom and joining it to the empire. The heroine realized why her father was dragging on so long, and she asked the man to stop, for she had already realized what request would follow after this story. Father says the temples have promised to send 20 healers to certain positions, because any war can't be without people to save the lives of wounded warriors. If they only needed 20 people, the main temple could easily provide them. However, there was an order stating that they cannot accept healers from only one temple, so the other temples must also support the empire. Father explains with a smile that despite the small forces of the enemy, as Renee mentioned, the commander-in-chief of the Paladin Knights and the general of the Imperial Knights will take part, and it will be a safe war. But reassurance in the form of healers is not unreasonable. Renee, who was given the opportunity to refuse immediately, did so as if to cut off any chance of molestation. But her father asks Renee to think about it well, because there shouldn't be many wounded in that place. The man does not know how to make Renee obey, because they no longer have a single healer. But the heroine realizes that she is the person who wants safety the most. People around her said Renee should be an aspiring teenager. Due to this, the girl has bullied her body and work a large amount of time. But this time, she just wants to have a carefree and happy life. Renee reflected on the fact that perhaps she would like to have the usual hobbies and worries of an ordinary person. The heroine living in this magical world has realized that wherever a person goes, he will always be treated as a slave. Moreover, she doesn't want to go to war because it will certainly be a long trip. Renee confesses to Father that she is afraid of war. Renee tries to push pity and uses the signature cat look from the Shrek movies. But then the father tries to manipulate Renee. He surprises the girl that there will be a gift for the healers who took part in the war. The father says that people from the capital have promised 300 gold pieces. Renee realizes that 300 gold pieces is the equivalent of 3 months' worth of the temple's savings. As a rule, healers should not allow allied troops to be injured on the battlefield, and it was a good price to pay. The girl glowed like a little sunshine at that moment and admitted that she had been taught that healers should help the government. She was interested in making a lot of money, but she didn't say it openly. Her father was embarrassed. The girl was very amenable to being offered money. If someone asked Renee how she could be so compliant, she would explain that the amount of money was really too much for this kind of business. She decided to go to war to help the allied troops and heal them. At this time, her father pulls the girl out of her thoughts, saying that he doesn't remember teaching her such a love for money. But the girl says it doesn't matter anymore. She just wants to go on her own initiative. The heroine vows that no matter what, the 300 gold pieces will be hers. Of course, the girl realizes that part of the money will have to be given to the temple and also taxed. But even in this situation, after calculating, the remaining amount will be huge. Renee explains that along with this war, a divine enlightenment came upon her. She realized that she had to live to save other people's lives. But inside, Renee continued to be an atheist. She realized that her true purpose was the material world. She tried to say she wanted to live a simple life without big changes, but since money has ruled the world since ancient times, if someone wants to become noble, they need a large fortune to buy a title. And if Renee gets rich, she'll have more opportunity to live a quiet and carefree life. She could own a coffee shop that everyone would look at with admiration. This is her dream that Renee could not realize in her past life because of her poverty. When the heroine is alone, she realizes that she must change before the customer arrives, so she takes off her dirty clothes. Since the Duke has a lot of financial support and is also going to go to war, it would be nice if she could get a little closer to him and gain his support. In that case, if they know each other, this guy will save the girl if she is in a life-threatening situation. But then Renee remembers that scary look when the Duke came to them for a cure. Cabell's crazy look makes you want to die. Lily, meanwhile, watched her friend in agony. Renee asked Lily, Does she too want to join the war as a healer? Lily confirmed her friend's speculation, and it turns out that she too will be going to war. Renee asks. Isn't Lily scared because she talks about such things in a very casual tone? But Lily explains that she is not afraid, because the heads of the Paladin Knights and commanders-in-chief of the Knights of the Empire will also be with them. The healers are very important to the army, so they won't kill them. Renee's. Lily's calm words about death sent shivers down my spine. In truth, you don't even have to have healing powers to be a priest. Renee knows that in order to become a priest, you just need to go to the temple, and if a person has any divine abilities, he can become a specialized priest. After that, there is a test for abilities where it is determined whether a person has healing powers. After their detection, the person is given the title of a healer and begins to communicate with him very carefully. This is to the point that there is even a special professional guild of healers for travelers outside the Empire. It's called Gloria. Lily said that Renee would have military experience, and wouldn't it be useful to tell her about it when entering the Gloria that the girls dreamed of? But Renee doesn't think it's the best thing for them. She doesn't want to go to work for the guild at all. Lily probably sees the whole thing as an extracurricular activity. It's still best to tell Lily that it's not like an internship with the Empire. Renee also tells Lily that she has no reason to refuse to go to war either, since people have offered 300 gold for the healer position. Lily immediately went cold. She realized that apparently Renee had decided to go to war just for the money, so she was disgusted to see her friend. Renee immediately tensed up, and she couldn't understand why Lily was reacting so coldly to her. Now she remembered that Lily had always suggested that they join the Healers Guild together. If Renee joined the guild, her employment would become much more than it had been when she'd spent time at the temple. And Renee really doesn't want to join the guild because there will be many tasks that will require more of her energy. Lily says that with Renee's abilities, being unemployed all her life is silly. The heroine recalls all the horrors she had to go through. But now, thank God, the girl was provided with housing and food. The main heroine, with a smile, says that to be unemployed and rich is the dream of many people. And it is true, because Renee's dream is just to have a lot of money. For Lily, war is a way to learn skills. But for Renee, it's the way, where you can make money doing nothing. But for some reason, both reasons sound pretty sad, because the girls go to help the troops that are killing the neighboring troops. Lily says let Renee do as she pleases and that's her life. The protagonist shrugs in response to Lily's objection. A friend asks the protagonist if she spelled her name correctly. The protagonist says that the priest checked her signature right in front of her eyes. It's been years since that mistake, and Lily keeps making fun of Renee for it. It was when Renee first woke up in the new dimension and became an orphan. She wore the temple clothes for the first time, and then she was asked what the name of this cute little girl was. The heroine knew that this body doesn't have a name, or at least she doesn't know it. When Renee thought about it, the priest was still young, but was still attentive, and realized that the girl didn't have a name. The man whispered warmly to the girl if she didn't mind if the man gave her a name. But Renee had a name. It was just from the last world. She didn't want to be called anything else. Renee couldn't call herself a name from her previous life because it would sound strange to the new world. Renee refused the priest's help and said she wanted to give herself a name, and that was her decision. At that moment, Renee felt empowered for the first time. She realized that she was really in another world, and now she had no relatives and friends to solve her problems. The priest was touched by the behavior of his young ward. He said that Renee was a very good girl. And even without her parents, she still has the courage to smile and enjoy life. Then the priest wanted to teach Renee to read and write. The girl was taught the skill of writing as well as reading. Renee decided to appreciate her new body. She realized that it would help her think of a suitable name. Her light ash-brown hair as well as green eyes were immediately noticed by the heroine. After looking in the mirror for 3 days looking for a suitable name, she was able to come up with a real name for the young heroine and decided to call herself Renee. And since the girl became a priestess, her full name was Renessa Elnur. But there was a problem. The girl could not contain her anger because she could not write her name properly for a long time and clenched her fist and broke the quill into pieces. At this time, Lily was laughing at how Renee had written her name incomprehensibly. She didn't know something was Japanese. After a while, Renee heard a knock. She remembered that a client was coming tonight and she shuddered. The time the client was due was already approaching and Renee was late. Ever since it was discovered that Renee possessed impressive divine powers, their temple had had a large influx of guests. But even so, the upper nobility still favored priests in the temples of the mainstream religion. So, compared to their unpopular religion, the temple had few visitors. The only thing keeping them competitive was the low price, so the temples had to charge less for the same treatment. However, about 3 years ago, the head priest did find a patron for their temple. From a young age, he has brought many victories in war, and it was said that Cable's sword blades are always in blood, so he became known as the Grim Reaper of Battles. He is the head of the Duchy of Willard. Renee saw that the man had already been met by a priest who was wondering when Renee would come to see them. Renee also knew that Cable was the commander-in-chief of the Knights of the Empire. Cable was a cold and terrible man whose gaze could turn to panic. The heroine realizes that her father is already talking to a client, and she is a little late. Renee realizes it's apology time and apologizes for knowing because she's sorry. This client looks around menacingly. Renee is used to calling him a client because remembering that this man is a duke makes her even more afraid. The duke comes to their temple to sleep, but of course this dream was unusual. Renee was startled at first. Why would a young duke come to their temple to sleep? But the reason was obvious, and there was no need to even ask, seeing the large bags under the warrior's eyes. Some nobles turn to the temple if they have trouble sleeping. Using divine powers to combat insomnia is a luxury few can enjoy, but most of the wealthy go to the central temples of the mainstream religion. In fact, the Reaper was the first important and expensive client to go to their temple. It was only because Renee had the necessary abilities that their temple could provide the services Cable needed. Perhaps because large temples always had many visitors, Cable didn't want to go to noisy places. And there could also be bad rumors about the great warrior visiting the temple to fight problems. Their small temple hides all the young lord's secrets. Now when Renee thinks about these reasons, she has a feeling that Cable has donated a huge amount of money to keep it private. Apparently, he had made arrangements with his father so that no one would know about their services to the Lord. For this reason, the room at the end of the corridor is personal to Cable. Renee realizes that this room may also be the place where Renee will die, because the threatening Duke always keeps an intimidating atmosphere around him. The heroine recalls the episode when she almost died. It's hard to forget the night she was scared half to death. She knows that the Duke is a master who can use sword energy techniques. It's an extremely rare ability, even in the Empire. The man has an extremely keen sense of intuition. When Renee realized that night that the candle had gone out, she had to light a match to bring the dim light back into the room. Before she could feel it, the Duke brought it to her in one swift movement, and Renee almost crashed into the wall. When she barely avoided the collision by stumbling, she remembered those horrible eyes that looked at her from under her black hair. It was the Duke's face that scared the girl to death. Renee was a defenseless chicken in the hands of a monster. After that incident, Renee obediently sat by the Duke whenever he came and did not leave him for a second without a good reason. After many trials and errors that Renee had experienced, she understood how to behave with a very irritable Duke who could wake up even from the rustle of the leaves of a book. She decided to use the time with the Duke to meditate. But still, he is intimidating and constantly ignores her attempts to speak. Still, Renee realizes she must ask the Duke something this day. She looked at the back of the undressing man who was getting ready for bed and apologized politely to him. But immediately Renee realized that she had made a mistake because the Duke was a nobleman, and she should have mentioned his title in her address. When the Duke turned around, Renee called him Sir. The heroine wanted to ask him about the upcoming war. But the Duke looked at the young temple servant in confusion, and he wondered what exactly the girl wanted to know about. Renee wonders, is it the first time the Duke hears about the upcoming war? Because he made an expression as if he did not know about what is happening in the Empire. She says that she heard the kingdom started a war against the Empire and hopes that her words will awaken the Duke's memory of that event. But the Duke looked coldly at the girl and told the girl not to call something like that the word war. Renee looked with surprise at the man who, for the first time in her life during these years, was able to answer her question constructively without ignoring the girl. But still, Renee was disappointed inside herself because she had hoped to find an ally in the upcoming war. The kingdom must be too weak compared to the Empire, and probably the Duke has fought with more terrible opponents, so he does not consider such an event as a war. But still, she will try to improve relations with the Duke to improve her chances of survival. The girl imagined a scale from red to green, and the more she goes towards green, the better her chances of returning to the temple alive and well. Renee, after being inspired by the Duke's words about the weakness of opponents, asks the man to let her escort the brave knight, and the girl will be indispensable as a good priest. But the Duke only gritted his teeth at the attempt to get him to talk. He stared coldly at the girl as if like a predator at its prey. After a second of silence, the man still wonders to his interlocutor why she wants to talk to him about this. Renee asks within herself to calm down, and she still has a good chance of survival. She answers the Duke in a voice that she will also take part in the war as a healer. At this moment, the crunching inside the Duke's jaw intensified. He looked even more displeased than before. Duke refuses to have Renee accompany him. The guy asks that the girl not get in his way during the trek. Renee shook a little with fear. She felt her chances of survival diminishing approaching the red zone. The heroine was angry because the Duke had behaved very badly to her. Many times she sat next to the man like a statue in order for him to sleep normally, but he keeps demanding the girl not to stand in his way. The next moment, the Duke grudgingly says that Renee is too noisy and goes to bed to get some sleep. The girl immediately silently turns into stone. The days that followed passed quickly, and 10 days flew by at the speed of light. Renee watched as autumn was already playing with all the colors and the leaves on the trees were falling. The heroine thought about the war, and she wondered how it would go, because she had never seen a war. Renee doesn't know if she will really be safe. At one point, Renee is startled by a voice behind her. Turns out it was two friends. One asks the other with a smile, "Is the one about to go to war?" The friend asks his comrade not to let himself be stabbed with a dagger. The warriors cheerfully discussed about the problems they were facing. Renee realized that it was probably two veterans, and she was a little scared because she was going to war too. All the people are very relaxed, unlike her. Outside the Empire, wars, big or small, never end. Nevertheless, the Empire dominates, sending soldiers to conquer land and expand territory, while the Empire itself remains peaceful. But all was built on the great feats of the Empire's heroes who ruled the armies. Renee realizes that one of them was a light paladin, but the other was a bloody reaper. The guys participated in the suppression of different nations and used to always come back in triumph. Although the leader of the Paladin Knights is always mentioned as a hero, the Duke's nickname is contrary to that of the Grim Priest, and Renee was surprised when she heard about it because these two had conquered new territories together. But their reputations were very different. Renee remembers children in the street being scared that the Grim Reaper would come and steal them away. Also, Duke Willard had another son. However, he was once found dead in his own mansion. The head of the family died in a similar manner. When Renee thought about these cases, she noticed that it was quite strange, and she now understood more why everyone was so afraid of Duke Cabell. People said that the deaths of the Duke's loved ones happened on rainy nights. Renee doesn't believe the rumors, although it is strange that the Duke always comes on rainy days to sleep. A girl was traveling with her friend to the war. She says there are a lot of people in the square. It feels as if they have already returned with victory, but still Renee continues to feel fear. Lily replies with a clever expression that she can do it again, because in their empire there is no chance of losing. Because with them will be the hero and the reaper. These two will destroy all opponents. But Renee is not afraid of losing, but of someone dying in front of her eyes, because she has heard about the power of their empire and is not afraid that their forces will be weaker than a small kingdom. Lily says that there is a possibility that there may be a conflict between the leader of the Paladin Knights and the commander-in-chief of the Empire Knights, and the white and black swords may clash in a duel. The heroine looks out the windows of the carriage and realizes that the transport is taking them to the military camp. Renee realizes that they will have to meet everyone before they leave. Lily confirms Renee's hunch and says that they are almost there. Renee, who has been looking out of the carriage all this time, notices a lot of people in the distance. The heroine saw that the knights were wearing gold uniforms that belonged to the paladins, who were apparently Elwyn's handmaidens. She also saw black uniforms. They were the Knights of Cable. The boys also saw the priests of the main religion who also came to the place to help the warriors. Renee realized that everyone was already gathered and felt that she was late, so she immediately took her things and rushed to meet the crowd, because she did not want to be late on the first day of the campaign. When Renee arrived at the meeting place, she felt as if they were not that late, and she didn't even pay attention to the guys. Lily asks Renee to take a look. The girl obeys her friend and takes a closer look. Renee hasn't looked yet, but she realizes that it's Elvin and immediately realizes that she has to report to him about her arrival. Renee saw a shining and luminous man who wore golden armor. She marveled at his beauty, and as if kindness was Elvin's middle name. Looking at his hair, it was simply maddening. Renee knew that there were many blondes among the royal family, but this was the first time she had ever seen such a hair color to suit someone so well. Elvin had the surname Kashmir, and it is a surname of the imperial family which means light. Renee also notices the very angelic sword forged 300 years ago, and she marvels at how well it suits the paladin's weapon. Not that Renee hasn't met handsome guys since she entered the fantasy universe, but this kind of experience is new to her. If you compare Elvin to Duke Cabell, it's a different story. She would never want anyone to get involved with this scary man who seemed to emanate a black fog. At one point, the healer met the gaze of the hero paladin. She was embarrassed by the gaze of the yellow gold eyes. Renee suggests that perhaps the head of the paladins can sense people like his master. The hero from fairy tales turns to Renee and asks if she must be a cleric of one of the minor temples. Renee, along with Lily, report back together that they are pleased to meet a respected paladin knight. Renee noticed that her voice at the end of the sentence trembled, unlike Lily, who was very calm. The knight looked at her carefully. A smile appeared on the man's face, and his eyes were filled with warmth. She wondered, are his eyes truly a precious topaz? The paladin knight continues his conversation with Renee, and confidently replies that he has heard a lot about the priestess from the small temple, and it is the legendary Renee who had one of the best results of the empire in the exam. Renee decides to apply her businesslike smile that she has practiced hundreds of times before. She says she's also heard a lot about the Golden Knight's exploits. But Lily, who was standing next to Renee, wasn't happy with her behavior, so she elbowed her in the side. The knight laughed at the amusing behavior of the two priestesses. He said he was honored to have such a good priestess know about him. Renee wondered why her attention amused the hero so much. When the guys talked a little, the knight told the girls about the territory they were heading to, for it was the western border of the empire, which had been completely overrun by the kingdom. First things first, they will take their troops and take them to the neighborhood of the border surrounding the enemy. At that time, the healers must save those people who get hurt during the skirmishes. People could die, and that's not good for Renee, especially if she will do badly, then the girl will be worried. Renee is worried, and a lump comes up to her throat. The girl is nauseated by the realization that she has to help people who may lose limbs or be with torn bodies. Paladin, ask the priestess to come to her senses. The protagonist was surprised at what was happening. Had she gone mad? And while the prince was talking, she was flying around in the clouds. It turns out that the paladin just wanted to warn the heroine not to worry. The man says that they knights paladins swear in the name of God and the emperor that they will not allow the enemy to even touch or approach their priests. The girl suddenly calmed down, even though she had recently felt quite bad. It was the first time the girl had been able to calm down completely while she was preparing for the march. The heroine sincerely thanked the hero for his support. Her chances of survival had increased not because of the Duke. It was because Renee had encountered the leader of the Paladin Knights, and it was already good. After a while, the girl was already feeling terribly out of breath. After all, a few hours later, she was on a campaign, and her main delusion was that it would all turn out to be an easy adventure. The heroine thought only about the war and completely forgot about something important, because their destination is the western frontier, which is surrounded by mountains. It is said that the mountains there have several hundred peaks, and it is really more like a tourist trip than a military campaign, because Renee will have to fight with the most insidious enemy, and it is gravity. The girl is ready to do anything to get home to her warm crib and not worry. No 300 gold is worth the effort she has to make now. Lily says that Renee doesn't want to be in a home she doesn't have. The heroine wept at the cruel words of her friend who turned out to be cruel. Of course, Renee meant the temple when she said home, but apparently Lily can't imagine the temple as her home. She remembers the commander-in-chief's words, and they said that the war will last 2 months, but Renee misses her temple. At some point, Renee felt that her legs could no longer keep up with the fast pace of the marching troops. Of course, the horses can't help the men because they are not adapted to the mountain ranges. On the 4th day of the trek, they had only climbed the 2nd mountain. She could already feel the force leaving her. Aside from the hiking, things were going smoothly enough. Renee tried to keep repeating in her head, like a mantra, that she had 300 gold pieces waiting for her and everything would be all right. Soon, the commanders-in-chief announced that they would have to attack the castle in the mountains. It was a small fortification, but still well defended. Renee asked himself if everything would be all right, because there would probably be the first casualties, and he would have to help people. But luckily, after the battle, there were only 2 casualties. Renee didn't even have time to react when the warriors returned from the spoils. On the 4th day, nothing loomed, and everything went smoothly, and they all continued to climb the mountains. Renee watched as the troops conquered castle after castle, and yet the wounded were too few. They were bored. But usually the girls used their powers to treat fatigue, or the usual minor injuries of the soldiers, so it was all right. And it was often the case that Renee and Lily didn't even get the job. After all, it was usually the priests of the main temple who did the healing. At that time, the other healers were left as backups. Renee realized that they were all moving together to be safe, but she was still tired because she was constantly living in the noise of the knights around her. Every time Renee thought of the 300 gold pieces, she felt a surge of strength. And the war was easy, and she would probably die faster because of her poor stamina than at the hands of her enemies. Renee also knows that the army needs them, because in case of a problem, a small number of healers may not be able to cope with the large number of wounded, because one healer can use a limited amount of power per day. To be sure that a healer is able to use their powers in emergency situations, they should always assess the situation and use their powers only when necessary. But Renee was secretly sneaking into the quiet and cozy place to use her own magic on herself. The girl was pleased with the rush of strength that came to her body when she used magic. Lily was able to find Renee and realized what she was doing. The girl said it would be even harder when they got closer to the main mountains. Renee wonders, why does Lily think that? And are the main mountains too steep? Lily says there are a lot of caves in that place, where the gorillas can hide. From now on, there will be more wounded. And when that happens, the heroine will have no chance to heal her tired legs and must hold on. Their army camped to wait for the scouts to return. The girls discussed the scouts, who had decades of experience in training with weapons, as well as military campaigns in other countries. These guys would definitely be able to return unharmed, even though it had been a long time. But at some point in the camp, there is a stern voice of the chief who demands from the soldiers to be ready, especially for the healers, because the scouts had to return. Renee reluctantly and Lily come out of their tent. They wrinkle against the daylight. Renee assesses the peaks they have to climb this day, and she wonders. After all, they are already too high. She thinks the problem is the difficult geography of the terrain rather than the war itself. But then there is another shouting match for the entire camp, more like a panic attack than a clear command. A man demands that the healers hurry to the site. Renee is startled and realizes that they are being called from the camp, and she turns towards the shouting man. Her companions have already quickly run to the scene. Renee doesn't think she should be involved in the events, but still they were all called out. As Renee took a closer look at what was happening, behind the back of the healers ahead of her, she was surprised and shocked. Renee saw a bloody warrior carrying a comrade in his arms. Renee turns towards the knights and realizes that she needs to pull herself together. But then she sees that the scouts are returning with a large number of wounded men who are all bleeding. One of the healers asks the hero's boss what happened to their scouts. The hero tells him that the boys were taken by surprise. Perhaps the warriors of the enemy kingdom were hiding in the east to wage guerrilla warfare. There was an uproar in the camp. One of the heaviest casualties was already unconscious. A large cut wound on the warrior's chest showed that he had been caught in a brutal battle, and his partner asked for some healers to help his friend. The head priest shouts that he will help the injured man immediately and goes to him right away. But then there is a sharp growl from the commander of the troops. He demands that the priest stop. The hero asks Renee to come over. The heroine was unsure and looked at the commander with fear. The hero immediately softens and asks Renee to heal the warrior while he is still alive. Renee wonders why she should heal the poor man, since there are so many other purposes. The healer that has already come to help says that he will do it and he doesn't need any help. But the troop commander says that he knows that the priest Varsi is a capable healer, but will be more effective if the priestess Renee takes his place in healing the soldier. For Varsi, the commander-in-chief's words came as a shock. At this time, Renee thought that she had become a priestess only 3 years ago, and it is obvious that Varsi is more experienced compared to her. But then, why did the captain tell Renee to take care of the wounded man? The prince asked her personally, so Renee can't just ignore his order and needs to save the man as soon as possible. Renee hears the whispers of the crowd behind her discussing her actions. The people were not happy to watch what was happening. They watched disdainfully as Renee took on the task of healing the soldier. Varsi laughed at Renee and said that she was unworthy to perform complicated operations, but Renee still successfully used her power. When the healing of the wounded soldiers was over, then the girl decided to talk to her friend. Lily thinks that the hero paladin must have noticed that Renee's abilities are greater than Varsi's, and instead of exhausting him by forcing him to spend 90% of his divine power, he decided to make a more efficient method and spend only 30% of Renee's power, which would be needed for the warrior's utterance. Renee says she knows this, but still wonders, is that why he summoned her? Despite the fact that she is from a very small temple, and despite the fact that they already have healers from the capital temple. Renee guesses that Varsi and his men were humiliated because of the girl's abilities. She's probably going to get in trouble for it. The pride of the Empire's healer genius has suffered. Lily asks Renee what she's going to do now. At one point, Renee and Lily's conversation is interrupted by other priests. One of the healers snatches the bread out of Renee's hands and says that Priest Varsi is not feeling well and needs to eat more to get better. The girl asks if Renee would mind giving up her seat for her older colleague. Renee realizes it's childish to steal her food. At one point, the guys are interrupted by Varsi's nervous coughing. Renee realizes it's pathetic. She just let her abusers get away with it, but this is the third time today and she has to do something about it. At least Renee won't starve to death, and the bread doesn't look particularly appetizing. The girl looked at Varsi pretending to be sick and said with her marvelous smile that she would hope for the clergyman's speedy recovery. She would just give that long-haired boy a seat. Varsi shuddered at the kindness shown Renee. The girl suggests that we can finally start eating. Lily wondered what her friend had been talking about from Varsi's servants for so long, and she wondered. After all, Renee's bread had been taken away. Lily was very angry about her friend's food being taken away and said that if Renee wanted it, they would destroy them once and for all. Renee nervously swallowed a bite of food and realizes that her friend is a really scary person. At one point, Lily stands up abruptly from the table and stares determinedly in the direction of Renee's abusers. Lily goes over to the people who stole Renee's bread and wishes them a good day. Lily says that she has just seen something very shameful and would like to ask the priests of the Great Temple a very interesting question. One of the thieves who took the bread from Renee happily replies that Lily probably wants to ask about the bread they took from Priestess Renee, but she can assure them that Renee kindly donated the bread to them because Priest Varsi has not been feeling well lately. Lily gave a very sly grin and demonic lights appeared in her red eyes. She asks an uncomfortable question and, is stealing now called donations? The smile on the thief's face didn't fall, but it was still obvious that the girl turned pale from Lily's stare. Renee's friend raised a ruckus and a lot of people started to come together to ask about the conflict in the camp. Renee realizes that the situation is quite dangerous and she worries whether her friend will be all right. At this time, Lily says that she was taught that following God does not mean to be happy because people are always sacrificing something for noble deeds. Perhaps if the Great Temple teaches the same thing, they might have also been taught not to profit from sacrifices. The girl who stole Renee's bread says that Lily is confused because their teachings are the same. Lily thinks that priests should help people and be honest. The girl who stole the bread was surprised by such arguments. Lily smiled predatorily. She mentioned that Sobranitsa was talking about the donation. The four of them had already received their bread. However, they had approached Renee and asked her to share the bread, and maybe it would be more correct to call it extortion. But still, Lily doubts that the priests of God could go to such humiliation. Apparently the guys were just a little confused. Because there's no way the priests of the great God don't know the difference between donations and extortion. The girl who stole Renee's bread felt afraid. The people in the crowd that had gathered to watch the scandal were whispering behind the backs of the disputants. Lily said with a radiant smile that true priests of God can't help but know the difference between donations and ordinary extortion. At this point, Renee thought that Lily's legendary verbal combat ability had awakened again. But still, if the priests have a problem while working together, who will treat the wounded? Lily says she's sorry to hear that the priests of the great goddess have stooped so low. Varsi is not well at the moment, and Lily hopes he will recover soon. Varsi was surprised at Lily's strength and could do nothing when the girl took the bread from him. Lily says that everyone has to take care of themselves and you can't take away food. Lily humiliates Varsi and says, "Is he from the great temple and can't repair himself?" She worries about what kind of restoration the people will be that ends up in Varsi's hands. That day, Varsi's stomach couldn't digest everything because he had never been humiliated like that before. Lily gave the bread to Renee. Her friend thanked her savior. Renee made sure that the bread remained clean and looked at Varsi's company eating the bread. The protagonist looked at the trembling bread robbers and realized that these guys better not to anger her friend, who will not be able to restrain herself. After a while, there was a commotion in the camp again, for the wars had been ambushed. People were doing their duties to save as many knights as possible, and at the end of the day, all the priests were exhausted. They sacrificed all their strength to heal the poor knights that were suffering from injuries after the bloody battles. As Lily said, the mountains were really steep, and there were also many more surprise ambushes. The royal warriors were taking advantage of the terrain to use surprise attacks and wipe out the Empire's warriors. Renee was the only one who could heal the most serious wounds because of her great power. Renee was always the last one standing. The priests would give up while Renee had the strength to heal the people around her to the last. When there are no other priests left, Renee can't say she's tired. Warriors turned to Renee because she was supported by the commander-in-chief, who showed that Renee had great strength. But still, this popularity was terrible in its own way, and a lot of wounded people came to Renee. At the end of the day, Renee felt so bad that she regretted the lack of coffee and alcohol, which were forbidden during the military campaign. The girl was thanked for her healing gift. She had gotten used to people in the camp calling her amazing for her healing abilities. The girl ran her gaze over to Cabell, who was still unharmed today and didn't even have a scratch on him. He hadn't needed treatment once since the beginning of their expedition. Renee thought that the leaders of the Paladin Knights didn't need healers either, though all the others had been wounded at least once over the course of the campaign. When Renee had free time, she could rest a bit and feel alive. She could escape into the surrounding forest around the camp to feel free. But at some point, the priestess is interrupted by a man's voice. She turns in horror to the source of the sound and realizes it's one of the knights. Renee realized that Gardiel was beside her. His autumn red hair and bright smile always gave people confidence and calmness. The boy saw that he had frightened the girl, so he apologizes to the priestess for his behavior. He shows his wound, which is already healed, and says that he wanted to thank the girl for her help. Renee says that the knight's shoulder is healed, and only a small scar can be seen on it after a serious wound, and she is glad that she was able to help the knight. Renee remembers that the wound was deep, and if she had been a little late, the outcome would have been sad. Renee asks Gardiel if he's afraid to go on a scouting mission because last time he could have died. She fears for the lives of the people she's helping. It's been a long time since Renee has slept well, but she still feels she has a lot of responsibility on her shoulders. Everyone expected an easy war, but for some reason, there are more wounded than ever. Renee thinks she's not the only one who's worried about this. Gardiel happily replies to the healer that he never worries about his wounds because the beautiful healer Renee will always save him. The girl says tiredly that this is bad thinking and thinks it is better to be careful and avoid wounds. But the warrior looks with a smile at his beautiful healer and the girl that charmed his heart. Gardiel replies to Renee that if he runs away, he will endanger the people behind him. The warrior shows his strong arms and says that he must be the one who takes the risk to save the lives of his brothers in arms. Renee thought for a moment. This is why Gardiel is on the front lines, because he is not afraid of death. Renee asks that Gardiel accept her apology, and she was wrong. But the warrior asks Renee not to apologize because she is just worried about his health. Gardiel tells her that the commander easily sweeps away enemies with his holy sword, so he is not afraid of the blessing of the light itself. Renee realizes that this is true, and even a glance at their general's scabbard is enough to realize that the man's sword is special. Gardiel was very insistent about their commander-in-chief's exploits, but what Gardiel really wanted to tell was what the commander was saying about Ren to his subordinates. The girl was surprised. Could it really be true? But why would the commander discuss Renee? Gardiel explained that the commander had mentioned the god who had brought Renee to them. She is a priestess. Renee was surprised because she actually came to the war for money. Gardiel also mentioned that the commander had called Renee a messenger of God. This proved to be too embarrassing for Renee. When Gardiel finally left, the girl could breathe out quietly because compared to the other knights, this guy was too energetic. Renee pondered how it could be that a man who looked like a deity called her a messenger of God. She really wants to see this man's face a little closer. Except for the first meeting and the day the commander ordered her to heal, a wounded paladin Renee had not spoken from the commander. Renee wondered, would she only be able to see the commander when the handsome man was wounded? The heroine realizes that such reflections are already overstepping all bounds because she is a healer and should want only the best for her people. When the girl returned to the camp, she heard the commander talking to Varsi. Elvin said that there are only 2 wounded. The commander also orders the novice Varsi to take care of the 2 wounded, while the general speaks to Renee. The girl looks intently at the bloody rag she was holding the warrior's wounded shoulder, for the girl was no longer afraid of treating injuries. At one point, the general demands that the girl follow him into the tent. Renee's heart was torn apart, and would the girl be alone from the commander? But Renee realized there was blood on their hero's back. Perhaps the commander had been wounded. Was her weakness and her dream of being alone with the commander and nursing his wounds realized? But that's too low for a girl. She didn't want the commander to be wounded. The heroine gets her thoughts in order and starts to think rationally. Considering that, judging by the abundance of blood, it looks like the commander's wound is pretty serious. Renee realized that the commander probably doesn't show his pain to keep the warriors' morale up. Renee hopes their commander didn't get hurt because of her bad thoughts. The heroine enters the commander's tent and sees him changing clothes in the corner. She notices the commander's bloody clothes and yells that she is sorry to see such a thing. Renee feels guilty. She apologizes for being disrespectful to Elwyn. The heroine only briefly thinks that it would have been nice if the commander had been injured, but she feels very ashamed of the thought. She is afraid that perhaps the universe hears their thoughts, and because of this, realized the girl's wish in reality. But she didn't really know that such a horror could happen through her fault. The commander-in-chief can't stand it and decides to calm the girl by touching her hands. The paladin asks that Renee calm down first. The heroine looks into Paladin's beautiful eyes and can't believe that this man is not God. The man asks why Renee can't calm down. The girl inwardly ponders this and realizes that for her heart, it is a great challenge to have such a handsome man around. She felt her palms sweat. The knight obviously sensed that Renee was nervous, so he wrapped his arms around her palms harder and squeezed. Renee was even startled by the paladin's insistence. Elwyn leans over Renee and wonders if perhaps he is doing something wrong. Elwyn's face seems to hypnotize the girl. Renee feels as if he is controlling her thoughts. She doesn't want to say anything, but her lips open. The heroine confesses her sinful thoughts that she wanted to cure Elvin of the injury he would receive in battle. But the man could not understand why Renee wished him harm. The girl blushes and realizes that there is no turning back. The heroine bows her head and confesses to the commander-in-chief that she has not seen him up close. That's why she would like to get to know him better. Elvin couldn't help himself and laughed out loud. It was the first time the heroine had heard the commander laugh so loudly. When the commander cleaned himself up, he asked after coughing, "Did Renee really think he was wounded?" Renee just thought the commander was wounded and thought she had come to the tent to heal him. But Elwyn says he is healthy and unharmed, and apparently the presence of blood on his armor misled the girl. Renee felt her precious image as a virtuous healer being shattered. In fact, the commander would like to personally apologize for the clerics giving Renee trouble. Elvin says that he and these people are from the same temple. The commander should have been more careful not to let the guys bully Renee. The heroine was stumped and thought that if the commander. Lily had long ago solved all the issues with the clergy. Renee says she doesn't need the commander's apology. Even if the clerics and paladin knights are from the same temple, the paladin commander has no reason to take the blame. But all Renee hears in response is silence and doesn't understand why the commander doesn't respond. The hero looks at the girl too closely. Is he trying to find out how sincere the girl is? But after a second of reflection, the commander does make some decision for himself and happily replies that the novice is right in her assertions. The commander was afraid that the actions of the clergy could offend Renee, and she could dislike Varsi. The heroine was disappointed by the captain's musings. Also, she can't figure out how to turn off this guy's laughter that isn't even going to stop. Still, Renee is happy to see the captain so happy, but the reason why this is happening, she is not happy at all. But then the commander-in-chief takes Renee by the little finger. His hand moves forward and wraps around the girl's hand. Elvin tells that if doubted at the moment of treatment, the priestess will be able to use only part of her abilities. The captain leans over the girl's hand and kisses it, gently touching it. His main reason for concern was that they should not turn their backs on the messenger of the god. He assures the girl that the next time he is injured, he will turn only to her for help. Then the novice will be able to see the captain up close. Renee stares intently at Elwin's face and cannot hide her crush. She was so happy that the next night she could not sleep. The girl's heart was bursting with anticipation of communicating with the commander. In the middle of the night, Renee was already exhausted. Her insomnia would reflect badly on the healer's abilities. Also, Renee couldn't forget Elwin's kiss. She still couldn't believe that the commander-in-chief had touched her hand with his lips. In the morning, one of the captains tells her that they were able to check the nearest mountain and it is safe. So the squad is going to a new position. Renee realizes that events are unfolding quietly. But every day the soldiers are injured, and the divine power of the healers continues to wear off without the ability to recover properly. Renee promises that when she returns to her temple, she will punish the priest who sent her to this war, promising that the events will be easy, and now she can't be fooled into calling the war safe because there are no safe wars. One sleepless night, the heroine decided to get some air and went for a walk. The heroine wandered around the camp and came across the sentries near the campfire who were sleeping peacefully. Renee realized that they are tired warriors who are better not to wake up unnecessarily and not to walk near the fire. But suddenly, the heroine heard a man's voice behind her asking what she was doing so early in the morning. The voice sounds as if it is soaked in the cold morning air. So Renee immediately realizes it's Cable. The Duke stood beside the girl, looking at her with his blue, like the moon's eyes. The priestess was trying to show her harmlessness. She says she went for a walk because she couldn't sleep. But Cable is surprised because priests are usually very tired, so they fall asleep early. The girl feels afraid, but tries to answer politely that she didn't treat anyone that day because there were few wounded men and the severity of their injuries was insignificant. But Cable still continued the conversation and asked an interesting question. He noticed that it was difficult for Renee to climb the mountains and whether she had gotten used to physical exertion during this time. The heroine could not understand how Cable could find out so much information about her, but remembering the past days, she realized that she was the slowest in the group. Sometimes Lily had to carry Renee in her arms. The heroine was embarrassed, and she thinks that such performances the guys could definitely notice. But Cable still remained as cold as ice. His face did not express any positive emotions. It was unpleasant for Renee to be under such a stare. The heroine looked at the silence of the night and also noticed the glow of fireflies. She decides to confess and says that her insomnia is probably due to fear of war. It's her first time in such a place. But remembering when Cable rudely told Renee that this is not a real war, the girl decided to apologize and explained that of course she does not consider this war serious. Still, the heroine admits that seeing people get hurt in front of her makes her unhappy. The Black Reaper, as if sensing the mood of her interlocutor, also became sad, although it seemed like he was only expressing cold aloofness before. Silence broke out between the two people. Only the cold night wind interrupted the silence of people. The hero's cold gaze made it hard for Renee to breathe, but still she noticed that the expression on Cable's face had changed from a moment ago. He looked as if he didn't trust him at all. The heroine turns her attention to the black sword in the commander's scabbard and realizes that it's been a long time since she last saw that blade. This sword is not as big and shiny as Elwin's sword, and also this sword did not emit light but darkness. It was the same sword that Cable used to kill the soldiers of the kingdom that attacked their units. The girl guesses that Cable did not just get a nickname called the Grim Reaper. The heroine could not forget her thoughts and accidentally said out loud that she feels uncomfortable around this sword. Elvin just laughed at Renee's awkward words, but Cable can kill. Renee pulls herself together and apologizes. She's sorry because the Empire is in the hottest phase of the war and she's letting herself say bad things about their knights. But Cable says that Renee is weak anyway, so she is understandable and doesn't apologize. The novice felt as if the knight's words hit her on the head. The girl does not try to show that she is offended by the hero's words and explains that it is impolite to speak ill of the knight's sword that protects them. But inside herself, the heroine cursed Cable, who had not shown the knight kindness towards her. The priestess lifts her gaze and sees Cable's beautiful face, which is illuminated by the dim moonlight. The Duke appears to be a truly handsome man. He says that Renee should not worry about wounded men, for war has never been bloodless. But still, he understands the girl's feeling. The heroine wondered how such a scary and cruel man can understand her excitement. Is this dark knight worried about the health of Renee? But remembering the past relationship with the Duke, Renee remembers only one moment when the man could be offended by her. But after this incident, Renee never woke up the Duke that came to their temple to sleep. The heroine realized that she must have been imagining Cabell in her head all along, as a black man who can't feel human emotion. Now she feels terrible about her behavior towards this man. Renee guessed that Cabell's words were meant to express concern for her, so she smiled, realizing that Cabell cared about her after all. The girl felt a pleasant breeze and realizes that the conversation had gone on too long, so she apologized to distance herself. But when the heroine said goodbye, she accidentally called the Duke a client, as it was in the past times when she treated his insomnia. Renee had almost given up hope that the captain would forgive for such insolence, but inside herself, she hoped that Cabell had not heard her appeal. The man replies to the girl that it would be wrong to call him Duke, for he had not yet inherited his title. The heroine felt cold at the Reaper's words. Renee, not to offend the Duke, called him a title and not a client when she was wrong. But apparently just calling the man Duke hurt him. Renee admits she didn't mean to offend with her words. It's just that Renee had heard before that noblemen passed on the title and titles to their children from birth. But it was also the practice to pass on the title after adulthood, and just 3 years ago, Cabell should have received his title. The heroine thought the initiation ceremony was cancelled because of the death of Cabell's younger brother. But she thought the emperor had long ago decreed that the legacy be passed on to the remaining son. Given all the facts that Renee knew, she can't understand why the Duke's gaze is so cold. Cabell tries to explain that if Renee calls him Duke, it may cause misunderstanding among people. After all, someone might think that he wants to get rid of his father because of the title. Renee has called the man Duke before. But now, for some reason, for the first time, he resented because of such treatment. So the girl was angry, but on the outside remained calm and obedient. The heroine asks Cabell what she should call the man if she can't be addressed as a Duke. But Cabell legitimately asks, why does Renee even want to hang out with him? The girl gets even more upset. But then the heroine thought that if she does not communicate with the Duke at all, then there will be no problems. She tells the gloomy and cold as ice man that apparently the Lord is right. The heroine quickly bowed to the Duke and ran off in the direction of her tent. Cabell is left alone in the dark forest watching Renee leave. At this time, Renee decides that if she is allowed to call the leader of the Paladins by his first name, she will address the captain of the Knights by his first name as well, and within herself will always call him Cabell. In the morning, Lily tried to wake Renee up because it was time to leave. Also, while the troops would go past the mountain, they could rest in the shade from time to time. But for Renee, Lily's calm voice only frightened her. The girl realized that probably after the meeting with the zombie Duke. And to be more precise with Cabell, she turned into a zombie herself. After the morning procedures, the healer learned that 6 scouts went to look at the Long Way, and if everything will be all right, their camp will move to another place. The heroine decided to stretch her body in order to get her body in fighting condition. But as she was exercising, Renee heard a familiar voice say hello. The girl turned her attention to the pale face of the paladin commander. Elvin was pleased to see his subordinate healthy and full of energy. The priestess reciprocated with a sparkling smile. She was happy to see Elwin. The priestess wondered if Renee had slept well last night. The heroine still had fresh memories of the day's events in her mind. She immediately blushed, realizing that perhaps because of the gentleman's behavior, she had some trouble sleeping. She said she was fine and slept well. Just fine. But Elvin did notice that the priestess seemed a little tired. The heroine is surprised, because seeing the commander's pretty smile makes it seem as if he knew the reason for the girl's restless sleep. Renee, already red with embarrassment, realizes that it is necessary to quickly change her topic of conversation and looks around. The heroine saw the Knights Paladins who put on armor, but their army will move out only a few hours after the scouts return, so she does not understand why the warriors were already ready to march. Perhaps these guys are also going on a scouting trip, and Renee asked the commander about it. Also, the commander was fully prepared for the trek, and he was wearing armor. Elwin explains that if he's in charge of the scouting process, it will go much faster. The commander also assures Renee that he'll be back very quickly. So, let the guys cross the river, and he wants the priestess to have a good rest in the meantime. The girl was not happy that their trek was starting again, but when the commander saw the sad face of his priestess, he thought it was necessary to give her motivation. so he said there was a farmstead behind the mountain where they could have a nice meal. Renee. She didn't quite understand what hut the commander was talking about, but she was already tired of camping food and wouldn't mind eating something tastier than camping porridge. But then the commander strikes the girl even more, saying in a quieter and more affectionate voice that if they successfully crossed the mountain, he would be very happy to have dinner with Renee. The priestess, who was secretly in love with the commander, didn't understand how she could be so lucky. Renee did not even hope that their relationship could develop, so she was very happy that she received such a wonderful offer. But the girl replies that it would be better if the commander didn't speak in such a tone. The man was surprised, and you could see the shock in his gaze. He couldn't understand why the girl was happy about the offer, but refused. Renee tries to explain that the whole reason is the way the Lord speaks. Elvin realizes that the priestess probably wanted to tell him to be careful, because people who sometimes say such things may not return from a combat mission. Elvin tries to assure Renee that everything will be all right, and he will cope with all the difficulties. The girl nodded, and inwardly imagined that if it were not for Elvin's perspicacity, she probably would not have explained what she felt. After the morning's preparations, the camp set off. Renee felt that her legs could not get used to the strain of a military trek. At some point, the girl felt a sigh, and she recognized it as Cable's. She was right, and it was really the Grim Reaper. It was as if he was taunting the heroine, saying that hiking this mountain was relaxing. Renee looked around and realized that all this time she was on a narrow path, holding back a large number of knights. They were waiting peacefully while the girl climbed up. The heroine apologizes and is sorry that she inconvenienced the Imperial Knights, but Cabell assures her that there is no reason to worry. Renee is relieved, because maybe Cabell has taken a liking to her after that night of talking under the moonlight. One of the Imperial Legion warriors assures Renee that they are enjoying the view, so the priestess doesn't have to worry about holding them back. The girl blushes at the soldiers' loud shouts. She didn't expect them to be treated with such care. Cabell called a break for 10 minutes. Such a break was too short for the heroine. The priestess approaches the Black Reaper. She assumes that she is slowing down the troop movement a lot. On the face of the commander, everything was already written, and it was clear that the man understands everything perfectly well. Renee hesitantly continues to say that the knights are delayed because of her, and it would be better if she goes behind them as before. Also behind the Imperial Knights are the mercenaries, and Renee is already familiar with these guys. One of Renee's acquaintances, whom she has treated more than once, cheerfully waves to her, greeting the girl. But then there was a loud scream in the crowd, for out of nowhere came danger. Renee saw her acquaintance struck by the arrow, and he flew aside from the strong blow. Brown blood spurted in all directions, and the mercenaries' friends had no time to react to the danger, as their friend fell to the ground after being mortally wounded. Someone in the crowd shouted that it was an ambush, and immediately Cable drew his black sword that Renee feared so much. The Duke turns to the priestess and looks at her with his hunter's gaze. The girl is amazed and wonders why their commander is looking so predatorily right at her, while there was a dark sword in Cable's hands. Renee didn't have time to think, and in a second an arrow flew by her and slammed into the tree behind her, almost miraculously not catching the healer's ear. The heroine felt a panic attack come over her, as she had just been on the verge of life and death. Cries of pain and dying groans could be heard among the column. People were fighting against the attacking spies, and there were screams that told that behind and in front of the column were also people of the kingdom. The heroine forgot for a moment that not all injuries sustained in battle can be healed. When blood splatters around and people fall from injuries, no one can help them. There are many soldiers who need immediate help, but at this moment no one can give it to them. The girl's thoughts are interrupted by silence, and suddenly all the sounds of battle faded away. She felt as if the darkness itself had taken her and taken away her gift of sight. But coming to her senses, she realizes that someone has closed her eyes, and she can't even look at this person. The man whispers to her to turn around and run away from the battlefield in the other direction. There is no time to think, and Renee must do it immediately. It turns out that Cable decided to help the girl and was able to help her with her panic attack. Renee's throat is tearing apart. She is tired of running, but her legs keep going. The heroine covers her ears to avoid hearing the sounds of metal coming from the battlefield. She's scared, and the memories are still vivid. She will never forget what the Duke did. She ran without looking back, and at some point she broke through the wall of bushes ahead. The heroine saw that the forest ended, and she found herself near a small building. And also, there was Lily that decided to help her friend. Renee remembered the words of their commander, and he said that there was a building at the foot of the mountain. She thought it would be a small house, but it turned out to be a real villa. Lily was in the place, and Renee was incredibly happy to be rescued. Lily tries to calm her friend down and asks that Renee stay put while Lily uses her healing magic. But the heroine did not allow herself to be cured. But after all, Renee could pass out at any minute. The heroine coughs and explains that it's okay, and she needs to save her strength for now. But also, Renee can't get the clinking of metal out of her head. Every strike of swords and bills reverberated in her head with pain. The heroine remembered the touch of the dark hands on her eyes, and in that instant, her new panic attack subsided. The black hand was gone, leaving behind a calmness in her soul and the realization that everything was all right. Renee realized that the Duke wasn't there, but she just remembered his touch, and that was enough to calm her down. She guesses that the commanders of the knights are not ordinary people, and they have other abilities than sword fighting. But still, the nightmare in which Renee found herself does not end. The paladins who guarded the mansion immediately came to the rescue. They were the same men Renee had saved from death in the previous battles. They asked the novice, had the squad of Imperial Knights been attacked? One of the paladins turned out to be an acquaintance of Gardiel, and he convinced the heroine that there was no need to worry because in the squad of Imperial Knights, there was Cable who would be able to destroy the enemies. Lily apologizes to her friend and says it was her fault. She shouldn't have gone ahead and left Renee alone. Lily apologizes to her friend and says that it was her fault because she was walking slowly and fell a few times while running in the woods, but she's okay. Renee tries to explain to her favorite friend not to blame herself for what happened. But inside, she remembers how she befriended the mercenary who was also walking behind the column. This guy always encouraged the priestess and did not let her give up. She recalls the unfortunate moment when the arrow struck her friend in the chest, who fell bleeding. The heroine wonders if the fighter would have survived if she had run up to him and healed him. But in that situation, she could not order her body to act, because the sounds of metal and the screams of wounded fighters did not allow her to concentrate and frightened her. She also realizes that Cabal sent her into the forest for a reason, and if Renee had stayed on the battlefield, she could have died quickly. Renee's thoughts are interrupted by a man's voice. She looks around and sees that Elvin, the commander-in-chief of their campaign, has been trying to call her all this time. Renee wondered how the paladin could be here, but she put her thoughts in order and continued the conversation. The commander held the priestess by the hand and looked at her with a sad face. The girl guessed that apparently the same vision of the head of the paladins helped the man to understand the real state of the novice. His gentle hands touched the girl's face. He had heard the attack, and it had happened right in front of the priestess. He gently stroked her hair and wondered if the priestess was too frightened. He wondered if Renee was all right, but looking at the girl's scarred, frightened face, he realizes that Renee has not recovered yet. He tries to convince the heroine that there is no reason to worry, and now the novice is protected. Renee confesses that she is actually in pain, as if she had been beaten. She wonders how she could be so far away from the battle in such a bad condition. She also admits to the commander that the arrow almost hit her. The paladin's hand gripped Renee's palm tighter. The heroine says that suddenly the arrow pierced one of the mercenaries, and the kingdom's troops ambushed him, so it's probably dangerous to be in this place now. With tears in her eyes, the girl realizes that if the commander of the Imperial Knights hadn't saved her, she would be dead now. But the girl's words are intertwined in one unrecognized stream of consciousness, and it was difficult to make out something while Renee was crying and trembling with fear. Suddenly, the conversation of the boys is interrupted by a terrible sound of metal. Renee looks away in horror and wonders. Perhaps it was the ringing of swords. The heroine hears it, as the head of the paladins draws his sword, but it's an unnecessary precaution. It appears that the Imperial troops have successfully defeated their opponents and are returning from battle with their weapons in their scabbards. The Grim Reaper led his army without expressing any emotion. Renee did not even have time to think, but immediately ran towards the warriors. The girl immediately found herself near the Black Reaper. Cable looked at the novice with his cold and penetrating gaze, which made the girl involuntarily shudder. She bowed to Cable and thanked her for her rescue. But after the girl's sincere thanks, the boy remained cold and looked out with a glance at the paladin commander. Elvin asked the commander, "What is the situation now?" Cable did not think long and said that among them there was 1 dead and 12 wounded, and 3 of them are dying. Renee's heart beat faster and wondered if the mercenary who had been hit by the enemy's arrow at the beginning of the battle was among the dead. Cable noticed Renee's consternation and gave her a piercing look, asking why she still hadn't been healed. But Renee didn't seek treatment because of the possibility of badly wounded people arriving who needed help. The Black Reaper smiled and asked, "Isn't a cleric considered injured even if he is injured?" The commander of the Imperial Knights also turned to the paladin and explained that he should remember to enter the number of dead and wounded into the accounts. Behind appears Lily, who immediately picks up her friend and says that now Renee is also considered wounded and needs treatment. The heroine looks up at the mansion above and realizes that she doesn't feel like crying as much now for some reason. When the wounded were treated, it was time to say goodbye to the dead. Even though there weren't many dead, the only person who had paid with their life in the past battle was Renee's comrade. The heroine was afraid that at the memorial ceremony before her eyes will be a scene of a dying comrade, but she saw only his smile. Also in the mansion in which they were resting, the troops of the Empire were able to discover a wine cellar. The commander-in-chief suggested that if you can't resist the elements, it's better to lead them. So he decided it would be a good idea to take a couple days off. In the evening, during dinner, Lily approached her friend and asked why the girl didn't drink wine. Lily didn't believe Renee, so she stared at her glass. Still, there was too much wine, and the girl was obviously suffering after the fight. But Renee didn't want to tell her friend about her feelings. Lily accuses the priestess that her glass is not even half empty, and if it was all right, she would have had a third glass. Lily checks that her friend doesn't have a fever. But what happened then? Renee smiled, because her friend had been worried and concerned about her all this time. Renee reassured her that she was fine because her friend had treated her after the accident. Lily smiled, looking at her friend. Renee felt that she should put a little of her share in maintaining a good atmosphere. The heroine thought that she could make a joke on the guy from the main temple and give him the bread he wanted. But inside herself, Renee realized that her mood was not improved one bit. Renee wanted to be alone, so she told Lily not to worry as long as she took a little walk. They had been friends for 10 years, and it was strange why Lily didn't realize that Renee just wanted to be alone. She tried not to think about losing her comrade, but it's hard to forget about it in such a short time. Lily understood Renee's thoughts though, so she just agreed. The girls smiled at each other, but the tone of Lily's voice alerted the protagonist. There was understanding in that voice, but also a sense of guilt. The protagonist went to the nearest forest to get some rest from the noise. But only the girl had to rejoice in the solitude, as immediately she was interrupted by someone's voice. Renee turns to the paladin. She wonders when that calm voice became so familiar. The man follows in the priestess's footsteps and asks, "Was the novice admiring the moon?" The priestess had no intention of enjoying the moon alone, but she can't deny that the moon is beautiful today. Renee says that this place is like a tourist attraction, and if it weren't for the war, this forest would be a tourist attraction. Talking to the commander has lifted the heroine's spirits. Elvin confesses that he too likes this secret place they find themselves in. The commander offers the priestess to take a walk together if they are alone in this forest. But after half an hour, Renee feels tense because the commander hasn't said anything during the walk. Soon, the paladin asks the novice, did the food come to her dislike? The girl explains that the food was delicious, and that is not the reason why she is sad. The hero suspects that perhaps the priestess is in a bad mood because of the noise that the warriors created in the squad. But Renee is even on the contrary happy that the warriors can rest. Then the paladin suspects that she might be alarmed by the too cold weather. But he is wrong, because the weather is warm enough now. The heroine is amused to see Paladin trying to guess the real reason for her sadness. The healer is also amazed by the handsome and divine face of their commander. Maybe it is because of the man's beauty that she finds it hard to say her wishes out loud every time. Renee sadly decides to confess that she wishes to return to the temple, and though it sounds childish, she just wants the war to end quickly. The priestess recalls that when she was offered to go to war, she immediately refused, but 3,000,000 gold pieces could make all the girls' dreams come true. When Renee fell asleep every time in the camp, she realized that among the wounded there were often dead, and this war was bloody. Also, Renee herself was on the verge of life and death, and no one can promise her that this will not happen again. She could have saved the life of the mercenary and her comrade, but she was too scared. The divine forces see how the priests live in this world, so Renee's powers grow weaker each time. After cases where she doesn't save people's lives, it especially hits her abilities. As the war goes on, Renee has a chance of losing a lot of her abilities, so she may not be able to save any of the wounded. Elvin probably thinks Renee is pathetic for thinking that, But still, coming to this place and fulfilling the role of a priestess was Renee's decision. But she can't be the next to die. The heroine is afraid that if she stays in this war for a long time, her mental health will start to deteriorate and no amount of money will save her head. Elwin sadly says that he will do everything in his power to end the war as quickly as possible so that Renee will see as few horrible things as possible. The hero gives his word to the priestess, and the protagonist cannot understand if those feelings inside her are the same feelings that arise in the young lady to whom the knight gives his oath. Renee's imagination painted a scene where she, in beautiful jewelry and ball gown, takes the oath of the young prince. After the commander's calm words, the heroine felt much better and even laughed. The priestess's laughter was supported by the paladin's smile. How can one not feel better when such a handsome man is trying so hard for her well-being? Elvin suggested that Renee should go with him to the others, because from tomorrow they would continue their climb up the mountain, so their rest would soon come to an end. Before leaving, Renee wants to check something with the commander. She openly asks if it is true that he wants to improve Renee's condition. Elvin smilingly answers the priestess that of course he will do everything he can for the novice. Renee smiles demurely and guesses something, because probably then her divine power will be more effective if Elvin improves her mental state. Suddenly the commander's smile disappeared, and the moonlight no longer brought those beautiful romantic shadows. Now the commander's face looked pragmatic and serious, as if he was showing his real personality for a moment. Renee had long ago figured it out, that the chief paladin's smile is incredibly beautiful and just as fake. The heroine explains her hunches that only repeated the words that she heard from the commander-in-chief. After all, earlier the paladin told the girl that healing requires a lot of sincerity from the priest, and if even a little bit of doubt, it will be possible to use only part of the abilities, because of which a person may not survive. Renee thought that the commander's attention might be drawn to her because of the great source of spirituality, and because the girl was inexperienced in military campaigns, she might run out of strategic reserve. She assumed that all the commander's courtesy was for the safety of the personnel, but not to directly reassure the girl who had fallen for the nice smiles and pleasantries. The commander sadly asked the priestess, "If it's true, wouldn't she be disappointed to learn the truth?" But Renee didn't answer directly and asked back, should she be offended and upset? Renee pragmatically notes that Elvin is a paladin commander and a hero of the empire called the Light of the People, and how can she be disappointed that he is more concerned about her divine power than her feelings? Renee would be more shocked if the commander truly fell in love with her, or was just interested and kind for no reason. Elwin's great responsibility makes him worry about the most valuable healer, so Renee can't think badly of the man who helps her only for his own benefit. Also, whatever the real reason, Elwin kept Renee company, and it was a good outing. Elvin clenched his teeth, and Renee can't understand why his facial expression changed so drastically. The heroine didn't want to be sincere with this man, but still, his facial expression made the girl admit that she was pleased to know that Mr. Commander of the Paladins cared for her. The heroine assumes that whatever the answer, her heart will not let her sleep after saying those words to the man she secretly loves. But Elwin wonders why Renee is not angry with him if he deceived the girl. Renee thought, looking at the calm and pragmatic face of the man who manipulated her feelings. The heroine surprises the commander by saying that she will not be harmed by the deception that the man has been building all this time. The priestess realizes that she has a benefit in any case, because such a tall, handsome, and also rich, and a guy with a very high status in the empire tries to calm her down, and also walks with her in the evenings. Also, from the very beginning, he confesses his true purpose to the girl, though secretly. Renee recalls from his world the good thinker Immanuel Kant, who said that a person should be treated as a goal and not as a means to achieve it. But even if Renee is the means and not the end, she is not angry. Elwin reflects on the wise words of a thinker from the heroine's world. Renee now ponders what is now on the commander's mind. Perhaps he was struck by the girl's attitude to the situation, or perhaps he was surprised by Kant's philosophical thoughts. But nevertheless, Renee could not help noticing that if one were to take as a basis the way Elvin was thinking, such a statue could be called as God in contemplation. The priestess watched the commander's thought process carefully to capture it in her mind. Elvin asks the heroine what happened, and the girl bluntly. Without a doubt, she replies that the guy is incredibly handsome. The paladin is not surprised and wonders if Renee feels better looking at him. The girl thinks about the commander's question, And after a short thought, she comes to the conclusion that Elvin's face makes her feel good inside. The commander, who had thought hard about Kant's words, asked, "Is he really the means to the novice now?" The girl was confused and she didn't expect her own words to be used against her. But she can't influence in any way that the face of the commander produces a very strong effect on the girl. The hero becomes over the novice and, addressing Renee by name, asks her to call him by his name from now on. Elwin explains that such practice will help him become a better tool for Renee. Apparently, when Renee said she was fine, even when she recognized that she was a means to the commander's ends, he was so inspired that he decided to follow her example. Apparently, he's going to use his looks as a tool, I guess. The awkward silence that arose between the young men was the commander's expectation that Renee would call him by name. The girl was embarrassed but still managed to call the commander by his name, blushing like a small tomato. The man responded to her question and the girl blushed even more. The paladin smiled. His radiant smile gave Rena incredible emotion. But still, she was dazzled by his grace like a bright spotlight. After a while, Renee found herself in her tent. She thought about what had happened and thought it was a very good dream. She remembered the face of the hero who addressed her by name. In the morning, Lily wondered why her friend had woken up so early. Today their army is going on the road. Renee washes her face and realizes that the events were too vivid for a dream. The heroine thought she might have gotten drunk and come to the room early to sleep, but Lily was angry at her for such assumptions. Her friend explained that Renee had returned from the forest with her commander and was laughing happily. The heroine recalls the past episode of her life and realizes that she called the commander by his name and blushed even more. The healer's dreams that the past event could have been a dream immediately collapsed. Lily asked her friend to get ready, but still, Renee must have a hangover, even though she hadn't drunk anything. Lily also pointed her finger at their glorious warriors that were also ready to travel. The heroine saw the men barely walking and struggling to stay on their feet. The priestess realized that perhaps on this day it would have been better to do a little scouting instead of going all out with the warriors, while they were still suffering from hangovers. At some point, the heroine met a glance from her means, Prince Elwin to be exact. She was so much frightened to see the commander that she even crashed into Lily, who was walking ahead of her. Her friend thought that Renee drank alcohol unnoticed from her, because she can't explain Renee's strange behavior. The protagonist met the commander's gaze, and it was definitely not her imagination. The chief paladin was ordering his army to form a marching position. The man turned to the priestess and nodded to her in greeting. Renee realizes that one nod from the man is enough to fly to the stars. Lily sees a trembling friend trying to convince herself that the commander's nod was just a greeting. The friend suggested that Renee must have gotten close to the commander. Renee says that everything happened after last night. She assumes that Lily, as quiet a person as she is, would be surprised at what Renee might say. But then Renee gathers within herself all the major events that happened with her and the commander. He promised to make every effort for her well-being, to make her divine power work more effectively, and their deal was based on Kant's quote. Lily interjects, "What happened yesterday?" Renee realizes that if she tells the story, she will also have to mention her desire to return home, and that is emphatically not to be done. She doesn't want to see the sad look on Lily's face again. The priestess did not think long and admitted that they decided to repent to each other. Lily was surprised because these guys repented even before they started dating, and it's very strange. Renee tries to change the subject and asks how steep the next mountain will be. But the girl's conversation is interrupted by a man's voice that wanted to ask Renee something. The girl and her friend look back at the guy who approached. The priestesses could see the giant. It was one of the knights of the empire that Cabal commanded. The knight's name was Tirak, and he was the vice commander of the Nickel Knights. His appearance is just as menacing as Cabal's. But there is one difference, and that is Tirak's character. This knight has a very kind attitude towards those around him. Tirak asks the novice Renee if her legs are okay or not, which the girl always had problems with during the trek. At one point, the giant notices a small and fluffy rabbit. One of the knights asks if Tirak doesn't want to cook this tasty critter. But Tirak immediately becomes angry and frowns and asks the knight if she would like the giant to cook it. Renee realizes that sometimes even Tirak's character resembles Cabal. The girl also reveals that her legs are much better since she's rested. But really, Tirak came to Renee because he wanted to tell her that, after the last time, their group will follow the healers. Tirak, of course, apologizes for his words, but he would like to ask that Renee walk faster this day and that she be allowed to use self-healing, especially for her. Tirak, of course, explains that the knights have nothing against Renee's slow pace, but the commander is sure to be displeased because he scares everyone and no one can't listen to Cable. Now on the street you could see puddles after the rain. The heroine realized it, but Tirak explains that it is after the rain that Cable is in a bad mood. The priestess is frightened, and she can't understand how she could forget that during and after the rain, the Duke's mood deteriorates sharply. Tirak explains that even though the commander is in a bad mood today, it doesn't mean that he would kill someone. At that moment, the captain of the Imperial Knights, Cable, appears behind the knight. The Grim Reaper walks up close to his subordinate, asking what he is here talking about from the priestess. Into this world, the giant that frightened everyone with his appearance trembled with fear. Renee could only wish her acquaintance only good luck in dealing with the commander. Cable says there's no reason to waste time and energy on unnecessary talk. The commander leads away his subordinate, who could only agree. Renee sees Cable's grim face and has doubts about whether the commander of the Imperial Knights is human. The heroine thought that more than 10 days had passed, and perhaps the Black Reaper had not slept during that time. She suspects that if the situation continues to escalate, someone may suffer at the hands of the Reaper because the war is unlikely to last long. The priestess also suspects that she may be the first to die. She's going too slowly. Among all the priests, Renee was the last to go, and the knights who understood the mood of their commander were frightened by her slow pace. The girl walked forward, but her legs were shaking and she was struggling. Renee could feel the tension building in the air. The commander of the Imperial Knights was walking almost behind the girl. He tried to push her along, but Renee physically couldn't walk any faster. She assumes she will be buried on the spot if she stops to rest a bit. The heroine makes every muscle work, and even though they are walking on a smooth road, it is still hard for her. Suddenly, the priestess heard a suspicious rustling. She immediately became alert, expecting a flying arrow. She realized that it was probably the sound of leaves falling to the ground and that winter was coming. While Renee was pondering, she heard nervous breathing behind her and realized that she had stopped for a second. The heroine yells that she's fine and can go on, so she runs forward, while Cable stares nervously after her. At some point, Tirak also hears a strange rustling sound and turns his attention to the source of the sound. The knight shouts to Renee to get her attention. The healer already tearfully realizes that she must be too slow. The knight asks Renee to turn around because there is something ahead. The girl looks in the direction Tirak pointed and sees a night shadow ahead. She doesn't have time to be surprised, but immediately notices the cute rabbit that Tirak was talking about all along. The dark knight sits down next to the cute creature. But at the same time Renee was looking around trying to figure out where the terrible shadow she saw was, it was much taller than the rabbit. Tirak apologizes to Renee for stopping her so suddenly. Renee realizes that apparently everyone is relaxed except her. The Nickel Knights are considered the best in the Empire, but Cable is clearly unhappy with the way Tirak is distracted by all sorts of rabbits. The healer also imagines that if someone attacks them, Cable will immediately use his anger and destroy all enemies in one blow. He will be able to protect the girl as he did last time, and she remembers the gentle touch of his black hands. Renee for a moment felt a pleasant sensation in her stomach like butterflies. With Cable walking behind her, it was as if she felt safe. Hours later, it starts to rain, and the healer suspects that she needs to put the Duke to bed that night to keep the people around her safe, and she imagines it as taking care of a client in the past. The heroine wants to save the knight's entourage from his own wrath. During the time the guys were walking, Renee never managed to socialize with Cable. But even without that, she had an idea where the commander might be. The night Cable interrogated her, probably from insomnia. Poor man was out all night. If Cable can't sleep, he'll probably be on watch and monitoring the camp. Renee knew she could find him at his post. The girl said hello to her old acquaintance. As expected, Cable didn't even say hello to her. He's very predictable. Cable is surprised and asks why Renee came to see him. While the Duke was thinking about the question, Renee even managed to dry some of her clothes. She says that apparently Cable can't sleep when it rains, so the priestess thought she could help their commander. The healer asks if he can let her magic be used to do whatever they were doing in the small temple. But the knight didn't want to accept the help of the lady priestess, even if Renee didn't demand money for it. Cable explains that he called off duty so he can't sleep. Renee says that in that case she will stay on duty. The Duke stared at his interlocutor. Cable's face showed how he felt about the healer's help. Renee was angry with Cable because she had shown pity for him to come and help, and now she was begging him to sleep. Cable returned his gaze to the fire and asks, had all of Renee's efforts been just to gain his trust? Renee didn't want to be sincere from the Dark Paladin. But if she didn't help him, he might snap at his subordinates. She would have to put up with bad treatment, all for the good of the community. Renee ignores the Duke's sharp words and says that if anything goes wrong, she will wake the man immediately. The Duke asks the next question and wondered why Renee was awake. The priestess was a little angry and didn't know whether she should tell the truth that it was because of the Duke. But truth be told, Renee has not yet forgotten that ambush when she saw the death of one of her comrades. She has already confessed it to Elwyn, who pragmatically used her. Renee hoped Cabell wouldn't think she was crying to him like a little child. But seeing the look on the captain's face, the girl realized that he didn't seem like he was going to mock her. The healer sits down next to the warrior and assumes that if he is silent, it is a sign of agreement. The priestess also realizes that the tent may be too noisy and may need to lower the cloth. But the Duke admits that as long as the priestess remains silent, he is fine with it. The knight's straightforwardness surprised the priestess, but she suppressed the anger within her. The healer also asked how much Cabell was going to sleep, and the Duke admitted that he would not mind at least an hour of restful sleep. The girl smiled and realized that he was only pretending not to want sleep. But in fact, he wanted it more than anything else in the world. The priestess promised the captain that she would make it seem as if he had slept for 2 hours. Half an hour later, Renee was already using her energy to affect space. The grim reaper and strong warrior that terrifies opponents was asleep, like a small child in Renee's care. The heroine couldn't take her eyes off the beautiful boy who looked like a painting. She thought an hour had passed, but perhaps waking a man who hadn't slept in 2 weeks. It's too cruel. Inside herself, the girl thought that she was so much enamored with the face of the hero that she lost track of time. The heroine felt a cold wind that spoke of approaching winter. She realizes that at the entrance to the tent there were towels and a blanket, and perhaps she would use these blankets to cover the Duke. She wouldn't want the man to get sick. But as she moved her foot toward the exit, she heard the creaking of the wooden scaffolding. The heroine remembers that the Duke woke up even from the rustling of the pages. But luckily her creak didn't wake him up, and now she has a new task, and that is to think of a way to cover the man with something warm so that he doesn't get sick without waking him up. The heroine thinks of ways, and the first thing that came to her mind was to use her divine power. When the girl did use her power, she was able to successfully go outside and get a cloak. She wanted to cover Cabell, but it was too big for the blanket the girl had brought. The healer didn't know how to properly cover the prince with a blanket, and it was strange because for her, this piece of cloth would be enough for her. The man's broad shoulders made it difficult for the priestess, who worried about his health. Renee leaned so close to the Duke that she didn't even realize she had woken the man. Their gazes met, and Renee was startled. Their noses were practically touching. Renee wondered what the Duke she had inadvertently woken up would do to her. The girl's heart was pounding fast, and she was running through in her head many options of how to get out of the ridiculous situation. But leaning slightly away from the knight, she notices his gaze. The man was not angry at all, but even upset. His eyes did not express aggression, but more fatigue. The healer could inadvertently fall in love with this sleepy, handsome man. Immediately, the heroine lost all her prepared phrases. She stammered and began to explain that it was quite chilly outside and wanted to cover the Lord so that he would not catch cold. But the priestess saw that one blanket would not be enough for the man and brought several more to cover him. But the captain takes the priestess by the hand and won't let her go. The boy said that he had gotten used to Renee's breathing, and when he heard that breathing was distant, he woke up. Renee realized that he must be so used to the sound of her breathing that he falls asleep to it. Now the girl's heart was pounding like it was about to jump out of her chest. She wanted to run away, but the Grim Reaper rested his head on the priestess's shoulder. The man put his arm around her and asked the girl to stay, just a little longer. His tired voice was too haggard for her to hesitate to help this warrior. The proximity of Cabell's body made Renee blush and her ears redden. The events carry over into Cabell's memories. He remembers that beautiful picture of his older brother reading something sitting near the steps of their palace. The still young captain arrived at the palace after training and said hello to his older brother. The man smiled at his younger brother and said that the others were already waiting for him in the building, so let the boy hurry up. But immediately before Cabell's eyes appeared the bloody face of his brother that was bleeding and lying on the earth. His loved ones lay at Cabell's feet, and he and his bloody sword could only watch them die. It was raining terribly outside at the time. Cabell still can't get those events out of his head, and when it rains, he can't sleep seeing terrible memories from the past. Renee remained in the Grim Reaper's arms until morning. She stood by his chair, not allowing him to take a step away from her, while the knight's hand clutched her wrist. But still no man can go so long without moving, and the girl's hand trembled involuntarily, causing the man to wake up. A surprised Cabell looked up to see the priestess before him, which was right next to him. The girl was embarrassed by the closeness of Cabell's face, and also surprised because she only trembled slightly, but that was enough for him to wake up. Cabell let go of the novice's hand in surprise. The girl fell to the ground, trembling from the loss of strength, because all night long she had to hug the captain, and when he sharply let the girl go, her legs could not take it anymore. Cabell turns to the novice and apologizes in the same husky but kind voice she heard last night when the captain asked her to stay. Cabell rises and, looking down at the occupant, wanted to thank her for last night's act. But Renee wouldn't let the Black Paladin speak, and embarrassed immediately ran off in an unknown direction. She could not understand what happens to her heart when she hears this hoarse and pleasant voice. After the incident, the heroine was worried that she woke up the tired captain, but it was with her help that she managed to get at least a little sleep for him that night. She also seemed to hear the words of gratitude, but because of the fright, she ran away without even talking to the captain. Lily approached her friend to talk about the upcoming exploration, but to Renee's surprise, it was the Nickel Knights who were going on the scouting trip. According to the rules, priests must escort the warriors to the scouting, and Renee will have to see out the captain. On the one hand, the priestess wanted to check the condition of her patient, but on the other hand, she was afraid of the anger of the man she woke up. But seeing the Duke, Renee realized that he was in good enough condition, and on his face there was no longer a fearful look and fatigue. Even the captain's subordinates were surprised at this change in their superior's mood. Renee couldn't contain her shock either, and apparently her treatment was proving to be good. It was as if Cabell had become a completely different person and changed overnight. Renee was amazed, for the captain had become more like a human than a demon from the underworld. The priestess looked at her healing hands, which she used to perform miracles. The heroine was glad that this time she was useful as a healer and could not contain her joy. The heroine showed her friend that she was able to save all of Cabell's subordinates who could live. But it turns out that the heroine had been pointing her finger at the Duke all along, the girl. She was not confused because she had already been in similar situations many times, so shaking with fear, improvised as she could, while saying that the Duke's face was renewed, and the color of his hair and his eyes as if became more human. Lily assumed that her friend had gone crazy from lack of sleep, but the heroine asked Rita to play along to save their lives. Renee might even be hanged and executed as a man who insulted an aristocrat, but to her surprise, Mr. Captain just turned away. Cabell was indeed a different man today. The girl can't find another word that would better describe Cabell as that he was strange and unlike himself. He had quite a few important things to do, but still his gaze often turned towards Renee, who was escorting his fighters. The girl smiled to survive and showed her good-naturedness. But no matter how hard the girl tried, 2 weeks of insomnia could not be remedied with one night of sleep, so the circles in the man's eyes were still present. The healer had not slept well that night either, so she didn't look any better, though she wasn't as tired. Lily suggested that perhaps Renee was ill if she was saying strange things about the Duke. But the healer didn't even have time to contradict her friend before the commander appeared behind her. The commander-in-chief assumed that Renee had some kind of illness. After all, she has a pale face, and he immediately brings cold medicine. But the girl explains to the commander that she just didn't sleep well and there is no reason to worry. But Elvin, who was supposed to be interested in the priestess, says that nevertheless it is better to treat the cold before the appearance of complex symptoms. The healer was surprised at the insistence of the commander that he was confident in preventing colds. The priestess blushed at the paladin's concern, and when she is near the commander-in-chief, her mood rises. Yet looking at Elwin's face, Renee realizes that he is worried about her health, although he cares about her for his own benefit. But when such a handsome guy is worried about the girl, she cannot help but rejoice. The heroine also politely refuses to take medication and says that she will rest a little and she will feel better immediately. Renee confidently shows that everything will be fine, and her smile inspires confidence. The healer asks that the commander-in-chief not to worry about her divine power. The girl's last words struck at the paladin's heart. The priestess guesses that his special eye could analyze the state of the priestess's spiritual energy, and he could think that her divine power has decreased, so the commander is worried. The heroine assures the commander-in-chief that she will recover quickly and she doesn't need any medicine. But the expression on the man's face showed that the situation with the girl's spiritual energy is deplorable if he is so upset. After all the talk, Renee retreated for a while to the edge of the camp where she decided to get some sleep. The girl even missed the moment the scouts returned. When she got a loud shout that the boys were back, Renee immediately woke up to a loud scream. She had no time to sleep before she was immediately woken up, and she was even surprised at the quick return of the men. The healer hears that the camp is noisy, and apparently there are many wounded again, and this situation is repeated every time. Although the heroine's strength is restored, but the girl is not happy to treat wounded soldiers, because she came to the army for money and not to study anatomy. Varsi's frowning voice pulls the healer out of her thoughts, and he was not happy that the girl decided to rest at such a crucial time. He said that the girl should in any case take into account for the future her bad behavior. The heroine has deliberately secluded herself in a remote place so that people like Varsi would not find her, but still, he personally decided to look for her. The boys return to the center of the camp. Renee reflects on the fact that apparently Varsi's resentment has not yet disappeared after their quarrel. Renee was told when she arrived at the camp that there were not many wounded, and for Varsi and the heroine, there were only 3 wounded. The girl thought that perhaps the kingdom would soon capitulate and she would return to her quiet life. The vice captain of the paladins explains that there was a battle today, but not as serious as before. The paladin speaks to Varsi, saying that perhaps the head of the healers should hold back his forces and trust Reyna. The girl was upset, and if the situation will happen again. Last time, Elwyn made a rational decision, but even so, he apologized. But this time, Renee does not understand why she should treat the wounded. The heroine gave her seat to the priest Varsi, and he smiled. The healer said that she felt bad and let him take care of healing people. The girl realized that after the conflict, the number of wounded had increased, and the disputes between the ministers had stopped. But she should not relax, because such situations could reignite the conflict. She realizes that if the injuries were serious, the guys called her because of the great amount of spiritual energy that Varsi did not possess. The healer is ashamed that she is doing Varsi a disservice by taking away his glory, but there is nothing she can do about it because her abilities were naturally great. The priestess realized she had to change and stop slowing down other people. The heroine realized that she had to stop paying attention to nothing, but immediately her mind was filled with worry about the future wounded and the people no one could help. Renee realized that as time went on, her feelings for people became weaker. She reacted normally to the deaths less and less disgusted by the war. The realization of all the changes in her mind made her feel sorrow. She was inexorably transforming into her new self, and the war was changing her thinking. For the next few days, Renee fulfilled her role as a priestess. She healed the wounds of the soldiers, and even in those moments when she was a little preoccupied with her thoughts and didn't pay attention to the fact that her bandages might be too tight. The healer convinced Gardiel that he was exaggerating his pain. The girl realized that they would be on the front lines for another 2 months, unless there was trouble, in which case they would still be able to encounter enemy units and would have to treat the wounded. Gardiel saw the mood of the priestess and tried to cheer her up, and said that the kingdom was able to surprise the soldiers of the empire in the first times, but now they are ready for surprise ambushes and are much better able to cope with their soldiers. To Renee, the words of a common warrior were unconvincing. She realized that the only way to save lives and reduce the number of previously wounded was to end the war as soon as possible. To the girl's horror, she had gotten used to the reality of war, just like the rest of the warriors used to losing people they knew. Everyone had already forgotten the slain mercenary, but the girl was no exception. Renee also wanted to address Gardiel and said that he could stop taking all the blows of the attackers on his chest. Gardiel, who had a strange ability to sense people's moods and thoughts, immediately realized why Renee was sad. He says that the girl should also stop blaming herself, and the death of the mercenary struck them all. The young warrior explains that the guy's death was without glory, and in the books of the Empire there won't be even a small note about his name. But if such an important person like the priest will remember him, it will be already wonderful. Gardiel also admitted that the purpose of the war was to annex the kingdom to the Empire. From the beginning, it was just a symbolic campaign. After the conversation from Gardiel a few days passed, their small army was advancing in the mountains, and Renee slept poorly because of the ambush in which she lost her mate. To this day, she couldn't forget what had happened. The heroine hopes that soon she will be able to sleep properly. Also, after that ambush, improved healer protection measures were introduced, and paladins along with imperial swordsmen took turns protecting the healers. As Renee walked behind the group, she was followed by either the Black as Death Cable or the luminous and divine Elwyn. Renee was glad, because in any case, the safety of her body was assured. And if she looked at the beautiful commander-in-chief, she would also provide herself with a burst of strength. But the heroine was too relaxed and at some point lost her balance, so she fell. The commander-in-chief only had time to reach out his hand towards the girl, but it turned out that her friend had saved her. Lily unhappily comments on the situation, saying that the years go by and Renee continues to fly in the clouds. The girl also apologized to the commander-in-chief for delaying their group with her awkward fall. Elvin smiled at the healer and shows that everything is fine. His smile is a balm to the healer's tortured soul. But in the hours that followed, the commander-in-chief behaved very aloof. His radiant face expressed no positive emotion. Renee worried that perhaps after their last conversation, her divine power had not yet recovered and that the commander might be worried. The healer thought that her divine power would recover quickly, but from the commander's reaction, she could understand that his eye was analyzing the girl, and most likely he saw that her divine power had not recovered completely. The heroine realizes that apparently emotions are affecting the amount of divine power, and she was paying too little attention to her condition. Now every day of her life is gloomy, but there was a time when she felt peaceful. The healer realizes that she must change. If the awkwardness between her and the commander continues, she may become depressed. The healer looks up and thinks that it should not rain for the next few days, and maybe it will help her sleep. The journey continued, and the girl only thought about sleeping, while her friend reminded Reina to be careful on the roads. The priestess was, of course, inattentive and slipped on the nearest muddy puddle. The healer hoped that someone would rescue her, and she thought that Lily and her romantic atmosphere would appear in her eyes again. But this time, Renee was in the arms of the handsome commander-in-chief who was right next to her. His gloved hands gripped the girl tightly. She felt that this was a very awkward situation, so she immediately jumped away from the paladin who saved her from falling. The man said that he could lead the priestess under his arm until they arrived at the camp. But the girl saw that the commander was very upset, and she tried to convince him that everything was fine and she could handle it. But the heaviness in her heart increased every day when she saw that disappointed face. The commander-in-chief explains to the girl that the messenger who came to them has explained that it is still an hour to go to the camp. It's still an hour away. To help the weak healer, the paladin will walk behind her to cover her from falling. The girl agreed, but inside she was disappointed, because although the commander-in-chief had a bright smile, he was pretending inside. After a few minutes, the commander came up with an interesting tactic and ordered his warriors to go forward while he covered the weak healer behind the column. The novice was not happy about being taken care of as if she were a small child. But even with the paladin at her side, she managed to fall. The healer promised that she would come to the camp and have a good rest, and then her divine power would be restored and the paladin could take it easy. But the commander-in-chief was not going to be silent any longer, so he immediately picked up the girl and approached her. The man wanted to say that he was not doing good things to Rena because of her divine power. His face was real again, and the fake smile was gone. The man says it must be Renee. Wouldn't believe him. The healer didn't even realize she might have been wrong in her assumptions about divine power. The hero smiled, and this time that smile was true. He didn't want to explain the reason for his concern to the girl anymore, thinking that Renee would understand it all by herself. After a short conversation, the boys set off again and followed their temporary camp. The paladin said that they were almost there and looked softly at his companion, which even made the girl blush. The healer wondered, is the commander-in-chief not deceiving her? And then she would like to know what the reason for his concern for her is. The heroine recalls that some scientists from her world said that it would take 21 days to form a habit, and another colleague's partner said that it would take about 66 days, which was quite different from the first hypothesis. Personally, Renee is sure in the first variant of the scientist, because during the time spent in the hike, she got used to the meager food and cold climate of the mountains. Renee spent already 2 months being a healer in the military camp of the Imperial troops. Suddenly, the healer Varsi comes to her and offers to drink some hot tea, because the nights are cold now because of the approaching winter. Varsi also wanted to tell her that healers must heal other people, and that the effect of self-healing is insignificant because divine power comes from sacrifice and selflessness. Renee suggested that in that case she should only heal herself in emergencies, and Varsi was glad that the girl had finally memorized his lessons. The girl had never been friends with Varsi before, so she did not understand why the priest paid such close attention to her, but she did not refuse. After a few days in the temporary camp, the healer was checking the provisions. The girl heard a familiar voice behind her, and it was the familiar Knight Tirak. He was frightened to see Renee because he didn't expect his favorite healer to be so tired. Looking at the girl, he could tell that she needed a good night's sleep. The healer waved away the annoying knight who wanted to help her because her insomnia was not cured. Tirak also says that he really came to Renee because the commander wanted to deliver something. He shows a vial of insomnia pills. Renee wonders if Cable cares for her that much. The healer also noticed that there were strange whispers in the camp. It was as if the people suspected something wrong in the forest around them. The camp had been too peaceful lately, and with the exception of one death, there had been no more bad incidents. Renee also realized that things looked very strange, and it looked like the royal troops wanted to create a major ambush and were gathering forces. The healer is worried that people react calmly to the deaths of their comrades and are only happy that these deaths were few. Also, the girl had recovered well recently, so she was ready to receive clients when they came. The heroine thought that the best solution would be to go directly to the center of the camp and find out something about the news that is known to the warriors, but came across a paladin and an imperial knight that were fighting among themselves. The healer realized that she had chosen the wrong moment to ask about the events that had taken place on the recon. The priestess realized that the best thing to do was to change the subject and said that she would like to take a few flasks of medicine to help the people in the camp as the warriors had appeared. They saw the healers exhausted and tried to heal themselves, causing only harm to the overall condition of the troops. The girl had always learned that if people much more important than her were fighting, it was best to stay out of the way. During the time that the girl spent in the military camp, she realized that her gift far surpasses the talents of other healers, and she is ready to help the warriors if her powers are restored. But the knights reacted very sluggishly to the healer's enthusiasm, and it was obvious that they were hiding something. The girl sensed the bad mood of the knights, and she became afraid. The warriors said that such information could harm the empire, so the healers should not know about it. But they did say that people don't always die in battle. For example, their army was running out of medicine, so some soldiers might die in the camp after being wounded because they had not fully recovered. Then Renee realized that those medications for insomnia that gave her the captain of the Imperial Knights were a scarce commodity in their camp. The girl now doesn't understand why Cabal had helped her, even though he knew there were other wars who might have trouble sleeping, and yet he had given the medicine to the priestess. The girl did not tell anyone that she received the medicine personally from the captain of the Imperial Knights. The healer felt a warmth inside her heart, and it seemed that Cabal cared about his surroundings, and the past resentments were forgotten. But the priestess could not understand only one thing, and that was why the Duke visited the temple and also could not sleep during the campaign without the girl's participation. If the captain had the medicine, he could sleep well. But Tirak, who had already been vice captain of the Imperial Knights for 5 years, said that the whole thing was about addiction, and 5 pills can put a bull to sleep, but the commander doesn't even yawn. The girl was scared, and she was even afraid that maybe the pills could be poisonous. Tirak assures the healer that she may not even take the pills yet, because soon they will cross the border of the kingdom. Tirak explains that the kingdom is at war because of economic hardship, and most likely their warriors are now very tired and have little food to eat, and unlike the imperial warriors, they have no estates nearby to rest in. Perhaps now the king's diplomats are actively trying to find help in other nations, but many are afraid to oppose the empire because its power is superior to even a few kingdoms like their opponent. To make a long story short, Tirak would like Renee not to worry so that they can end the war soon. But the healer suffers from insomnia not because of the fear of a long war or fighting against enemies. 10 days ago during the recent rain there was an accident, a rare occurrence, but still the soldier fell off a cliff and died. But as much as the girl tried to let go of those troubling thoughts, she didn't feel sleepy. It was because of a strange sensation that appeared after nightfall. But when the first rays of sunshine came, the fear receded, and Renee went back to her usual duties as a healer. She thought that maybe she had PTSD. If the medication helped, she could keep the disease at bay for a while. The healer thinks that if their army succeeds in capturing the capital, then maybe in 2 months or even sooner, they will return home, and then the girl will see the sweet faces of the temple novices again. The priestess will live and fight for her dream and a quiet life. The girl would not give up. The healer looked at the night sky and at the yellow stars that seemed to be approaching her. Suddenly she realized the terrible truth, and realized that it wasn't the stars that were actually glowing in the dark. The girl realized that the enemy's fiery arrows were flying towards their camp. At one moment, the healer lost all hope because their camp was on fire. Tirak, with whom Renee had been talking recently, appeared nearby and covered her from the new arrows. Renee realized that this mountain was the last frontier for the defenders of the kingdom, and they would not allow the Empire to enter their territory, so they had been preparing an attack all this time. The low number of surprise attacks was due to the fact that all the units were gathering for one strike to replace all the knights of the Empire in the trap. The healer runs away together with Tirak in order to save herself. But suddenly, she casts her gaze towards the tent where she lived together with Lily. Her friend was confused and was coming out of the blazing tent. At any moment, the awning could collapse, but Lily was more concerned with where Renee was now to help her. The protagonist held out her hands towards her friend and asked for the girl to leave. Lily thought that Renee was inside the tent, so she didn't go far away, and when she saw Renee, she relaxed. Suddenly, the tent couldn't withstand the onslaught of fire and collapsed with the awning falling toward Lily. The heroine saw her friend disappear under the blazing structure and tried to help, but Tirak did not let go, and with his strong hands restrained the healer from approaching the fire. The healer could not believe that she had lost her friend and rushed to her. It turned out that Lily was alive and was able to get out from under the rubble of the tent. The protagonist thanked the gods that they gave her hope and her friend survived. Gardiel appeared near Lily and asked the temple attendant to leave the dangerous place quickly, but the girl ordered the paladin to be silent and asked him to move the tent rubble and help the wounded. The heroine realized that Lily was right, and now the healer had a good chance to save those wounded who might die before the battle was over. The priestess noticed one wounded fighter who might die from blood loss. His wound is serious. She remembers the death of the mercenary, and if she had immediately given him medical attention, then maybe the guy would have survived. But Tirak has become abruptly rude and says he won't let Renee go and she must be the first to safety. But the healer has to cure the fighter, so she doesn't agree because of the dark night. Every sleepless night, the heroine pondered that perhaps her quick help could save the mercenary's life. She thought that running away from danger was the right thing to do, but still her conscience tormented her. The girl realizes that no matter how good a healer she is, she can't resurrect a dead man, and while the knight's body is still alive, she can save him. She realizes that she must save the knight right now, or the darkness will consume her and her divine power will be gone. In that case, her condition will worsen. But the girl has no time to react before an arrow passes near her face. Tirak asks the girl to get behind him, because now they are surrounded by enemy knights and need to be on guard. Renee also heard the sounds of the wounded screaming in pain and turned towards the other healers. That were also running after them. The healer realized that the arrows that had passed her had hit 2 priests from the Grand Temple. The girl had never noticed enemies attacking healers before, but if this is the case, then Tirak will have to not only fight, but also protect the wounded. But there was still the possibility of arrows hitting her partners, and if she ordered Tirak to guard the healers, he might get hurt. So it's best to keep quiet. Tirak yells for Renee to run away now and he will cover her escape. The girl has no choice, except to run away while Tirak takes out the enemies. It turns out that the enemies were much weaker than the Empire's warriors. As soon as reinforcements arrive, all the enemies will be destroyed. But one of the archers is aiming for Tirak. The man thought the arrow was headed in his direction, but unfortunately, it missed him. The knight realized that the archer must have been aiming at Renee, who was fleeing. The man turns around to do something to help, but his speed is too slow. The kingdom's soldiers are too desperate to kill the clerics. Meanwhile, the arrow wounds the protagonist's leg, but it flies off to the side. The healer realizes she's in pain, but if she doesn't run away, she'll die from the archer's next arrow. Before the priestess can see the new threat, a warrior emerges from the bushes. She can hardly stand up to an armed man, so she looks at the soldier of the kingdom with horror. At this time, Tirak realizes that the enemy is too far away, and he does not have time to run up and save the novice. The girl realizes that now is not the time to think, and it is necessary to save her life, so she tries to dodge the swordsman's blow. The girl falls to the ground and bends over. At that moment, Tirak was already there, took advantage of the girl's maneuver and attacked the enemy. The bloody body of the knight flies aside. Tirak asks Renee if she's okay. The girl says she was shot in the leg, but their conversation can't continue, for a new threat has emerged, one that Tirak is the first to notice. He reaches out and pulls Renee to him. The brave knight embraces the healer to save her life. The protagonist couldn't understand why the knight was acting so strangely with enemies behind him. But then she hears it. Arrows plunging into the swordsman's flesh. A bloody cough comes out of Tirak's mouth. The healer looked at the back of her protector. As expected, there were plumage arrows that had almost completely entered the body. But the deputy captain of the Imperial Knights does not give up and attacks the emerging enemies, destroying them with a single blow. But after the fight, he collapses to the ground and Renee runs over to help him. The healer immediately promises to heal the captain and everything will be fine. Renee has always treated warriors in prepared places before, but now she doesn't even have time to analyze Tirak's body to see which of his wounds are fatal and which need to be healed first. Suddenly, the healer heard the stomping of feet behind her and realized that Tirak had not had time to deal with all his opponents. The girl was preparing for death because she could not resist the enemy knights. But in an instant, the space around the priestess darkened and purple sparks appeared. The battlefield exploded with the purple color of the Dark Paladin's techniques. From the explosion of energy, the Blood Reaper and captain of the Imperial Knights by rank appeared. He had come to sow death among his enemies and was heading towards his opponents with a confident gait. The priestess only had time to look back before the silhouette of the Blood Reaper swept past her. All the enemies that surrounded Renee were dead or had fled. The second squad from the kingdom could not believe that the Blood Reaper was also present on the battlefield. Cable looked at the enemies with his demonic eyes while destroying them by the dozens. One of the attacking knights shouted to his brothers to retreat, for they would not do well against the Reaper. Renee. Now she finally understood why Cable was called the Blood Reaper, for he was a killing machine. When the captain of the Imperial Knights left, the healer was not yet safe and was still in the war zone. Meanwhile, Cable was skillfully fending off the arrows that were flying towards the remaining healers. The paladins had also returned to the camp, and Elwyn commanded his warrior to help the wounded. Renee realized that she had to heal Tirak while he still had life force. The girl hopes that she has been dubbed a messenger of God for a reason, and she puts her hands on Tirak's horrific wounds. The healer must do her best to save her friend and partner, but she fears she will fail, for too many arrows have struck Tirak to protect her. The priestess tried to calm herself down in order to increase the effect of her spells. But unfortunately, the blood from Tirak's body kept pouring out, and Renee could not use her divine powers to the fullest. Towards the girl looked Elvin, who was startled by what he saw. The healer looked at her bloody hands and could not believe that the divine power was not working. The priestess resorted to prayer and asked God to help her at least once. Renee was shocked that Tirak was conscious at all. After all, he had serious wounds. Now the boy could die if Renee can't save him in these minutes, and she is losing hope. Tirak asks the novice not to cry. He confesses to the girl that it was his fault, and he made the decision, so it's okay. The man's hands fall and he becomes unconscious. Renee yells for someone to help his dying friend. But although the kingdom soldiers are retreating, many healers were wounded. Renee was now useless and could not save her patient and her partner. But suddenly Cabell appears and asks Renee to calm down and puts his hand on top to help the girl. He says that the whole situation is his fault, because he should have been more careful in choosing the place for the camp, and he could not take control of the situation in time. And in the end, because of Cabell, Renee has to treat this man and save him from death, so he asks that the girl be blamed for everything. It's him. The healer doesn't know for what reason her divine power returned in that moment, but she suspects that Cable's warmth gave her hope. But Renee's divine power still wasn't enough. She pictured in her mind the joyful Tirak who had always given her hope. He was present in the girl's life and made her smile. Renee wanted to save this good guy who was a wonderful friend to her. She doesn't know how to go on living if she can't save her good friend. But Tirak was no longer breathing, and whatever Renee did, the life was leaving the brave fighter's body. Cabell said Renee could stop. The healer is even now worried about her feelings and she doesn't know. Would this moment haunt her for the rest of her life? Inside Renee, something cracked at the seams, and she felt as if some part of her identity was lost. But along with that loss, Renee gained insight and the power showed its source. Suddenly, the space around her was illuminated by a divine flash of incredible power. The girl did not even hope to change anything. Besides crying, the girl also screamed with anger and powerlessness. Energy of incredible power came out of the healer's hands. Remembering that episode, she thought that when she was called a messenger of God, maybe the guys knew something. The entire neighborhood of the camp was blinded by the divine light of the pillar that stretched from the sky to the desperate priestess. The healer lost consciousness and woke up the next morning realizing she was alive and well. Lily runs into the room and asks her friend how she's feeling. Her friend told her that Renee had fallen asleep for 2 whole days. But Renee wasn't interested in hearing about her condition, and except water. She wanted to know how Tirak was. Lily realized that apparently Renee, after waking up, wanted to know only about him. The friend sat down next to Renee and inquired, wouldn't she want to know why she had slept all these 2 days? But she didn't wait long and told her that her friend was fine and she was able to save Tirak after all. When she heard that God had made it possible to save her friend, the healer thanked him for hearing her prayers. Lily said that Renee had shown a true divine miracle. She remembered exactly that it was raining, but suddenly the clouds disappeared and a soft spring wind began to blow from somewhere. The people in the camp felt their wounds begin to disappear before their eyes and healed. The heroine was surprised. Could her spell have healed all the people in the camp? Lily said it wasn't just in the camp. In fact, the enemies that were in the neighborhood also had their wounds healed. After such a great release of energy, Renee slept for 2 days. The priestess was surprised, and did she really use mass healing? Like the video games from her past universe. Lily says the most important thing is that her friend is okay, because she was scared when she saw the commander of the Imperial Knights carrying her in his arms. But now Renee must rest, and Lily must report on her friend's condition. The healer agreed from her friend and thanked her for explaining the whole situation. After Lily left, she decided not to stay in the camp and ran away to the camp. The heroine wants to see with her own eyes the condition of her patient, whom she miraculously saved, so she went in the direction of the healers. The girl said hello to Varsi, who controlled the situation in the camp. The man was frightened by Renee's sudden appearance. The priestess could not understand what was happening because it felt like Varsi saw a ghost. But the next moment, the healer was frightened by the behavior of Priest Varsi, who was always unfriendly to her. The man bowed politely to Renee and said that he was very happy to see the minister Renee. The heroine felt as if she were in the palace with such treatment. But Varsi tries to say that words alone are not enough to express gratitude, and the miracle that Renee has performed will always remain in everyone's memory. Varsi wishes Renee would forgive him for his past rudeness, for he had underestimated the priestess's skills. When people in the camp heard that the novice Renee woke up, they immediately ran to her so that the girl could see their healed wounds. Lily from the commander-in-chief shows up, and her friend was not happy that Renee ran away from the tent. Elvin, with his usual fake smile but still out of fatigue, asked that Renee walk with him. Lily was surprised that Renee had just woken up and the captain wanted to go for a walk with her, but Elwin convinced the healer that they would walk for a while and just talk. During the walk, the commander-in-chief told Renee that people from the moment of the girl's miracle only talk about the blessing, and she truly did the impossible. The priestess was embarrassed when Elvin spoke so flatteringly of her, but the man wasn't exaggerating at all. He was only telling the truth. If what had happened could not be called a miracle, then what was the word Renee had chosen for it? Some of the knights have begun to call her saint. The girl remembers being called a messenger of the gods, and it reminds her of the past. Elwin says that as soon as the war is over, they will return to the Empire and make a detailed analysis of everything that happened. But the girl admits that she is not a saint, because initially she was more concerned about the burden of responsibility that will fall on her shoulders after Tirak's death. The reason why her divine power did not appear at the crucial moment was probably because she put her own selfishness before the life of another person. The healer realizes that apparently such words disappoint the commander-in-chief. Apparently this conversation should be stopped, and Renee will promise that she will not stop trying for the good of their army. Elwin openly asked Renee that she had saved Tirak not because he was her goal, but because he was her means. It was because he was her means to an end when she told him so. So Renee's peace of mind was more important to her than the fighter's life. The commander-in-chief says that Renee blames herself for her selfishness, but in the end it was by doing so that she was able to save everyone in the camp, so he doesn't understand what part of her actions were wrong. The healer suddenly remembered the words she'd said to herself during that conversation under the moon. And for some reason, those long-forgotten words brought tears to the girl's eyes. The commander-in-chief showed his true personality and said that he would never be disappointed in Reina, and neither was she disappointed in him at that moment. He reached out his hand and picked up the girl's soft hair and touched her ear. Elvin also wanted to talk about a very important topic and surprised the healer by talking about his request because he wanted to hug the priestess. The man saw Renee's gloomy state and immediately started to justify that it was only as a support, and Renee wanted him to be honest with her. In fact, it was just a passing thought and nothing more. The healer resented the commander-in-chief because he teased her, which sometimes caused her to have trouble sleeping. Now he is the first to pay attention to her and ask for a response. But still, she is not one of those who will be offended for a long time, and also words sometimes just burst out about what she knows very well by her sad experience, so she agrees and allows the captain to embrace her. The man was surprised and didn't expect the girl to allow it so quickly, but he smiles and says he'd never hurt her. It seemed to the heroine for a moment that the man was actually pleased. Could it be that Elvin sometimes smiled for more than just a disguise? The man's hands came closer to Renee, and he stroked her shoulder in a friendly manner. The girl realized that he was talking about such a hug, and she had already imagined that they would really hug, and she just thanked him for his concern. But Renee did not have time to react, as Paladin immediately moved her to him and pressed his whole body against her. At that moment, the girl's soul went to heaven. Now she could take advantage of the situation and pressed herself against the body of a handsome guy. Elvin turns to the novice and says that he is still not sure. Can her actions be called selfish while stroking her back? But if Renee suffers so much, then it is altruistic selfishness at its best. After the embrace with the commander-in-chief, the heroine was let near Tirak, and he was pleased that although Renee had healed everyone in the camp, she had healed him better than anyone else. The healer was really surprised to see the giant in good health, because she thought she would need more treatment, because Tirak's injuries were really terrible. The boy said that if Renee didn't believe in his full recovery, he could show her the places where the most terrible wounds had been inflicted. But Renee didn't want to see the fighter's naked body. Suddenly, Cable appears behind her and asks the giant not to abuse the poor priestess. The man is sweating from fear and says that he is guilty and got hot, so he apologizes. In an instant, the terrifying giant is as far away from Cable as possible, which scared him half to death. Cable, who has approached the heroine, notices that her hair has gotten shorter. Renee says that just during the fight, one of the arrows almost pierced her ear, but it was only a few strands of hair. But Cable says the girl is already very pretty, so don't worry about it. He just thought the girl would be upset and wanted to be supportive. The healer realizes that Cable really cares for her, because even in the moment of Tirak's danger, he held Renee's hand to heal her friend. She thanks Cable for everything he's done for her. But Renee wanted to tell him that she thinks she's being selfish. But Cable replies that if Renee only cared about herself, the divine power wouldn't have come to her. As much as the girl doesn't think her act is selfish or not, part of the blame lies with Cable, because he made Renee fulfill his selfish demand and she doesn't blame herself. The same goes for Tirak. The giant heard his name and immediately ran up to the boys. But Cable says that Tirak is alive now only because of Renee's selfishness. The heroine is frightened that Cable speaks in such a bad tone of voice, but Tirak still thinks he should thank Renee. After all, in the end, he capitalized on the girl's aspirations. Renee couldn't understand why she should be thanked, since what she did wasn't good in the first place. But Tirak says he is grateful to Renee for saving his life. He was worried when he was on the verge of death, and he heard that all their knights were successfully healed as well. Tirak orders that all the fighters thank Renee as best they can, and immediately the girl is startled by the general scream of the Imperial soldiers that greeted their new saint with glee. Tirak even tries to fall to his knees, but the heroine stops him in time not to embarrass her. One of Tirak's girlfriends asks the priestess to leave him on his knees, because now he has to stand like that for the rest of his life. All the commotion Tirak has caused has probably had a bad effect on Cable, and Renee looks at the captain. But he sighs indifferently, realizing that the people need to release some of their tension. The captain says he's grateful enough to the healer and it's time for dinner. There isn't much food left, and they should hurry up and get in line. The healer is also called to have the novice go with them towards the dining hall. The spring breeze was blowing in the middle of winter, and the smiles surrounding the priestess made her feel warm. Apparently, it was a truly magical moment created by the divine power the girl had unleashed 2 days ago. On the way to the dining room, Tirak told Renee that the first time he had met the captain, Cable had been a small child, and he had already joined the Knights. His first wife and first love had known Cable much longer than he had. When they return to the capital in honor of their victory, Tirak will have a great feast to introduce Renee to his family. But the girl was gloomy, and the giant's words did not comfort her. Tirak says that only thanks to Renee, he will return to his wife unharmed, so she must know the man who saved her husband. But Renee is more likely to faint at any moment because she has to go ahead of everyone else. After lunch, the boys set off. The people behind the girl said that the novice was the strongest and best to cheer her up. But still, 2 days of rest didn't help the girl to recover fully, though perhaps she is always so fragile and weak. Tirak, who was walking together with the heroine, and says that from their hill you can see the top, and behind it begins the territory of the kingdom, and then the fighting will move to another country. Renee realizes that means they are approaching the plain. The enemy troops ran away just towards the plain, tucking their tails when they saw the healer's miracle. After that incident, their soldiers are always on the lookout and scout the terrain much more carefully for guerrillas or enemy sleuths. But in all the time they've been on the march, they've never come across any soldiers of the kingdom. Renee doesn't know where the enemies have gone, but as long as Cable is walking in front of her, she's not in any danger, because she saw the Reaper in battle. Suddenly, Cable covers her with his body, and the healer is startled by the Duke's sudden movement. Immediately, he calms the girl and tells her to head back, apparently ahead of the army in the kingdom that was waiting for the Imperial soldiers on top of the mountain. The Black Paladins draw their swords and prepare to fight against the kingdom's swordsmen. But Renee notices that the opponents are completely unarmed. One of their messengers is heading towards Cable. A man holds out an object toward the captain of the Imperial Knights. It turns out to be a scroll, and Cable has to open it to see the messages from the kingdom. Renee and Tirak also wondered what the scroll said, so they got behind Cable to read the message. Briefly, the message said that a miraculous light had touched all the soldiers of the kingdom, and they were deeply touched by the gracious light that healed all without exception, and they regretted the mistakes they had made, and they would give up the lands of the empire, and their only wish was to become part of the great holy empire, where there are people who can create a divine miracle that illuminated the souls of the subjects of the kingdom. The royal general fell to his knees, and all his subordinates bowed their heads in prayer. They asked the imperial soldiers to grant them the opportunity to become members of their great empire. The paladins, as well as the imperial soldiers, raised their swords up and rejoiced in their victory. And so ended the Mountain War, in which Renee had taken her fate. Events continued in the kingdom where the victors celebrated their end of the campaign. Renee was unhappy that the king's soldiers started the war, because of which many people died. But still, the girl continued to drink a lot, and Lily noticed that apparently the greatest drinker of their temple was returning. But Renee was not afraid to drink alcohol, because she was glad that there would be no more wounded, and the next day they could all quickly return home with the help of a scroll to move. A scroll of displacement is a magical item that instantly transports people to a certain place, but it is very expensive. Elvin, who overheard Renee and Lily's conversation, explained that many scrolls were burned in the fire when the Knights of the Realm suddenly attacked them. But luckily they had left some scrolls in the manor where they had stayed last time, and they would go there, rest for a day, and then they could go to the Empire. But Renee realized that now they were far away from the manor and the way there would not be easy. Elvin asked the priestess to be patient, just a little longer, because fortunately there would be no more wounded, and the energy of the healers would not be wasted. But the priestess was never used to walking. In all the time of the war, the girl continued to walk behind everyone, and Elvin covered her. The prince also wanted to ask Renee if she felt that something had changed in her. Renee says that the decree of surrender was sealed with the royal seal, and that makes her feel much calmer than before. She no longer feels like she has to retain every bit of divine power, and for once, she's gotten a good night's sleep. Though besides that, a lot of things had changed inside her as well. Apparently, Elvin was not satisfied with the priestess's answer. He wanted to ask about Renee's divinity. The heroine was frightened and directly asked the man that she could see divinity. Had she still not recovered it? Therefore, if it's true, it will be difficult for Renee to work in the temple when she returns home. But the healer forgot that she was bound to be given 300 gold pieces, and that amount of money is enough for her not to work. But Elvin explains that he meant something else. After the day Renee had performed the miracle, her divine power was not fully restored, but still increased significantly. He doesn't know how much greater. Renee doesn't understand why the man feels so insecure. Elvin says the girl's power is on the same level as the cardinal's, and that's why he was worried. Renee even choked on the information she heard. Is she seriously comparable in strength to the cardinal of the central religion? The commander-in-chief says that everything is correct. And now Renee has a little more strength than the archbishop. If you wait a little, it will be replenished, and then the strength will be at the same level as the cardinal. They could make an exact test to make sure of the commander-in-chief's suspicions. But the girl wouldn't want to do that. Elwin says that they will soon see the camp, and as they get to it, then offers to examine Renee's ankle, which was wounded earlier. Somehow, Renee ends up in the tent of the prince, who puts a bandage on her and examines her ankle. The man says that he had asked before to be called by her name, but the priestess continued to ignore his request. Renee realizes that it is difficult for ordinary people to call the prince by his name, but the prince himself gave her permission to do so, so Renee could still call him by his name. But the moment the man gently held her bare feet, she had a very mean thought. So she immediately blushed and pulled her body away from the prince. But the guy didn't let go of the girl's foot, and a yellow glow appears around her. She realizes that it is a divine power. And that's when the prince tells her that it's a big secret. He can use divine power, and he's not very good at it, but he can heal on the level of ordinary clerics. The energy that paladins possess is considered one of the many forms of divine power, but the ability to heal is very rare, so people who possess it are considered healers. In other words, the prince is terribly strong. Besides being a war knight, he can also heal, and that makes him a doubly dangerous opponent. The commander-in-chief says Renee can take the bandages off whenever she wants, and maybe they can ride. But still, let her wear them at least a little. The healer says that she feels sorry for Elwin having to keep information about her powers a secret. The hero says that if someone finds out, it could bring a lot of problems that the guy doesn't want to face. But Renee blushed even more and wondered why the prince revealed the secret to her. The man recalls conversations in the imperial palace where people were talking about a 6-year-old child with a lot of divine power that is born once in 1,000 years. Such an arrogant boy could use his power to become emperor. Elvin smiles and asks Renee what she thinks of the reason for his secret. Renee's face floods with color and she runs out into the street. Every time she looked at the prince, she felt like she was flying to heaven, but it was still the best sight of a man she'd ever seen in her life. When the guy looked at her with that wonderful smile, her heart jumped out of her chest from the overload of feelings. The healer realized that her inner feelings were not only because of the handsome face, and apparently Elvin liked her. The priestess realized that she might have fallen in love with this manipulator. Afterwards, Renee tried to cool down after her frank conversation with the prince, and Lily found her friend freezing in the cold. Later in the tent, Lily heard a little of Renee's stories and said that she had long noticed that the commander-in-chief was very friendly with her friend, but had not known that he cared for her to such an extent. Renee, who had hoped for a relationship from the prince, wanted to find out from Lily what she should do next. She remembers the prince comforting her with a hug, and if he does that, then maybe he has feelings for the priestess too. Renee says he also always smiles when he sees people around, but Lily corrected her friend saying that the prince only smiles when he sees Renee. Lily was very angry because her friend was looking for any clue to prove to herself that she could build a relationship with the commander-in-chief. Lily hesitates and says that Renee knows that she sometimes went to treat the Viscount's son. The heroine knows that rich people call a healer instead of a band-aid. But what was Lily trying to explain with this story? Her friend tells her that after the treatment, the Viscount used to treat her to tea, while she listened to the gossip that ran in social circles. And at least one of those gossips involved the commander of their army, Lily. Though to explain that if Renee really wanted to date the commander, she only knew his name but never listened to the aristocrat's stories about him. First of all, he is the commander of the Holy Paladins of the Empire, and as they say, because of that, he can't attend every ball. However, the children of the imperial family still need to be at some events. On such days, the young and unmarried nobles pursue Elvin with the whole crowd, and the girls run towards the handsome man. Elvin is just at the right age to consider marriage, and he is very kind and so popular that he is called the Light of the Empire and is the first place on the marriage market. Objectively, looking at all these things, Lily wonders if the man's behavior was not the result of a social habit of treating ladies. But for Renee, this information immediately causes depression, because she had not even thought about it. Lily realizes that her words have affected her friend too much. The friend therefore decides to cheer up and says that there is a chance that it is not true and the guy allowed to address him by name. Lily's words immediately show the effect, and Renee has hope. After the evening gossip, the girls went to bed and Renee reflected on her life. She didn't think she was attractive, but how can she compare you to the beauty of young aristocrats? She's just an orphaned commoner from a small temple and nothing more. Renee knows nothing of politics or high society. She is too plain and simple to be a prince's wife. Although the girl's powers have gotten the better of her, but she has no other choice, and she just has to confess to him not to think anymore. Lily wonders, did Renee really dare to confess to the prince? But the heroine has made up her mind and decided everything, because she has to look good and be trimmed, so she asks Lily to help her. But her friend could not understand what Renee will get from her confession, and whether her dream was not to earn a lot of money and then do nothing and have fun and eat. If the confession was successful, Renee risked becoming a princess. But she thought for real that the 300 gold that the girls would get for their work as a healer was not such a great wealth. If she would be young and rich, why not marry a prince? Renee could grow old and write a romantic letter to the prince but never send it. As the years pass and the bitterness grows, and one day Renee can't bear to be separated from her love, so she dies in painful loneliness, and it will just be the life of one unhappy healer. Renee tries to explain what the future will be like if she doesn't confess, but if she does tell her feelings, there will be no more false hopes and everything will be set right. Renee also has a more important reason, because she would like to finally realize if the prince has feelings for her, and now it's like she's riding a merry-go-round. It's worth a quick confession while everyone's talking about Renee's miracle. After all, it is better to talk to the prince now than when she is surrounded by sophisticated ladies at the ball. Renee continued to ponder about her possible confession because she should do it, but she is afraid that the prince was just being kind to her and has no feelings for her. The girls' musings are interrupted by the commander who appears. He asks why Renee is thinking in private, and the girl says that she just didn't sleep well. The light from Elvin illuminates her face and she just feels good to be near this man. The commander-in-chief says that they are halfway to the empire and he would like to have a small dinner that day. Also, Elvin says that there is a wonderful view ahead and he knows that Renee has been worried a lot lately and he hopes that she will relax a little. The girl thanked her leader for his support. She was pleased that the man was worried about her. She decides she's going to come clean no matter what it costs her. When the guys were near their temporary camp near the palace, Renee decided to tell them about her feelings. The healer must confess and she has no right to make a mistake. Elvin had arranged for dinner, and after his victory toast, he allowed the warriors to rest except for the sentries. Renee slowly ate a dish during the communal dinner watching the commander. The healer tells Lily that she is about to throw up and feels sick. Lily doesn't understand why Renee can't just enjoy her vacation. But the healer says if she keeps putting off confessing, she'll never confess. It's like the priestess has aged 10 years and she's very worried about confessing today. Lily offered to call the commander-in-chief, but Renee yelled at her not to even think about it. The girl's screams were even noticed by her friends from the squad of Imperial Knights. The heroine had now lost all the confidence and determination that she had earlier, and she felt scared. Renee finds it hard to catch a moment when Elvin is alone, but suddenly she notices the guy leaving somewhere. Renee immediately drops her gaze to the bottle of alcohol. I think it's wine. It's very expensive and she'll have one glass to feel brave. She tries to justify that if she's rejected, it'll be blamed on the alcohol. Renee hates herself, but she can't help it. The girl runs towards the departed paladin, while Lily realizes that the prince liked the girl so much that she is desperate. Varsi also saw that the priestess had run after the prince, and he was afraid that the girl would be all right, because she seemed to be very drunk. Lily could not believe that one glass could make her drunk, but Varsi said that it was a very strong wine and she should try it. Lily took a sip and realized that this wine is really strong, and how Renee managed to drink a whole glass. At this time outside, the healer felt bad after drinking alcohol. The priestess was having a hard time, and she couldn't understand whether it was nerves or alcohol that was tormenting her more. Her mind was foggy, and she could not orientate herself well, but her lover could be seen from afar because of his height and build. She suspects it is Elvin, and her heart would explode if she called his name. The man stood in the shade of a tree, and his silhouette blended in with the surrounding foliage. The healer trembled, and blushing says that she thought about it for a very long time and doubted if she should tell him. She admits that she likes the man and seems to be in love. Finally, the girl confessed her feelings and was able to fully reveal her heart. The man did not come out of the shadows. After a moment of silence, he asked why the girl had made this decision. The girl continued to tell that she likes the guy very much, and all his character traits are wonderful. She likes the smile and also the care that the hero always gives her. The girl thought that maybe for Elvin it was too unexpected, and he was confused. A male voice said that he did not quite understand what was said. The heroine thought that apparently the man would reject her, and she knew that he would. So she could no longer resist the effects of alcohol and felt her legs not holding her body. But suddenly, a man's hand picked her up by the waist. She thought about the man's voice as well as about other characteristics that were different from Elvin's. The most important was the color of his hair, which was different from her lover's. Renee realized that she had confessed to the wrong man and was now in the arms of a stranger. She could not understand to whom she had just confessed, and her heart was torn apart by the realization of her mistake. After a while, the girl wakes up at night and realizes that she had a nightmare, but besides that, she was also hungover. When the healer thought about the hangover, she became scared and trembled. If it wasn't a nightmare, then she had confessed her love to another man, and it wasn't Elvin. The healer realizes that it seems the sun hasn't risen yet, so she looks outside. She just goes to that place and makes sure that it's not the first time she drinks alcohol, and it was necessary to get so intoxicated that she didn't recognize her love. When the girl found herself in the same place, she saw the same tree and manor with a beautiful view, and it was the same place where she confessed her love. She confessed to the wrong person after one glass of wine, and of all the people she could have confessed to, it was apparently Cabell who happened to be around. It was scary what he was doing late at night in that place. The healer hopes the guy walks by and prays to God he doesn't see her. But then Cabell interrupts the healer's prayer and asks the obvious question of whether the girl remembers what she told him last night. The priestess admits that she remembers and calls the Duke Sir so as not to accidentally offend him as she did last time. But Cabell was unhappy that the girl was hiding for some reason. The healer realizes that the captain must be angry. Renee realized that it seemed the man had been up all night and his look was very irritated. The priestess realizes that apparently the man is definitely uncomfortable with her confession, and it's best to quickly admit that she was wrong and apologize. Also, she was drunk, and so she was not thinking straight, and there was such a misunderstanding. The confession wasn't really meant for him. Renee opened her mouth to voice her thoughts, but at the same moment she was interrupted by Cabell's calm and pleasantly husky voice. The girl looks up and sees the beautiful, sweet, and smiling face of the Duke. He asks that the girl call him by his name. The man doesn't want the priestess to call him by some strange title and wants to call her by her name too. Renee was surprised at the tenderness the Blood Reaper showed her. The healer realized that Cabell was not what she had seen before, and he could be gentle and sweet. The heroine was surprised to see Cabell smile, and she also heard about his request to call the man by his name, and it turns out that the Reaper did not reject Renee. Everything fell apart for the girl in an instant. Cabell waited silently for the heroine to answer him, but he couldn't help himself and decided to support the girl by reaching out his hand to her. She doesn't understand why the man is coming closer and whether he thought that she had tears of joy, which were really from fear and from sadness. Cabell asks how long will Renee hide her face while addressing her by name. The girl realized that the Blood Reaper's voice was very gentle and pleasant. It was as if Cabell had become a different person. He leaned over the girl while smiling into her eyes. She thought that if she told the truth, she would not be left alive. And if it was not a dream, because Cabell was the Blood Reaper, she could not say that she had confessed by mistake. Now, Renee has a question. What to do in the situation she found herself in, and how to stay happy without dying at the hands of the Reaper. She began her thoughts with the fact that the reason for the stupid situation was the traditional liquor of the kingdom, which the girl confused with wine. It is said that this drink is a very strong alcohol that can even kill a bull. No wonder the bottle had a picture of a running bull on it. Renee realized that that picture was a warning sign. Renee told Lily all about it. The friend admitted that if she had heard the story during the haircut, she might have accidentally cut off Renee's ear. She realizes that the girl was drunk. But how could she confess to the wrong person? Because it's a real horror. But the most interesting thing is that the Duke really had some feelings for Renee. The healer realizes that it is probably true, and in any other case she would not agree with Lily. But it is about Cabell, and she does not understand anything at all, and whether she was wrong about this black and gloomy man all this time. The girl shrouded herself in her gloomy dome of thoughts and couldn't imagine anything good in the future. Luckily today they would be accompanied by paladins and not Imperial Knights, and she was not yet mentally ready to see Cabell. The prince was shining like the sun as always, and politely asked the priestess if she would like to stop and rest if she was feeling ill. But the girl said she was fine and not tired. Luckily today she was talking to Elwyn and not Cabell, because in that case she wouldn't have been able to move. But the commander-in-chief still had something he wanted to talk to Renee about. He had seen Renee fall last night, and the commander of the Nickel Knights had carried the girl in his arms to the tent. The healer got scared, and did the prince see her confession to Cabell? The girl was drunk and apparently just went in the wrong direction. She thinks fate played a bad trick on her. Elvin says that if the healer has been feeling bad since yesterday, she probably needs a rest. The girl was very happy that the prince cared for her, but she was also sad that she didn't confess to him. She thought that if she confessed and repented, perhaps a miracle would happen. But suddenly, the healer's thoughts are interrupted by a loud scream from the forest, and Renee stops. Nearby is Tirak, and the girl was angry that he interrupted her possible confession to the prince. The man says that he ran to the end of the column for an important reason. It was obvious that the deputy captain of the Imperial Knights was very tired after the fast run. He wanted to know if the novice had accidentally said something wrong to the commander. After Tirak's words, the girl was frightened. While Elvin didn't understand the clergywoman's reaction, Tirak says that the commander kept looking back, so he asked him what happened, and when he suddenly said Renee's name, he also wanted to visit the clergywoman. But in the end, Tirak said he would bring the girl to the front of the column himself. He said to tell her that he would meet the girl when they arrived. The heroine realized that if Cabell wanted to meet her because of her confession, she'd better go to hell herself. The heroine asked Tirak if he had any idea what strange things were going on with the commander, but the guy says he's never seen him like this in all 5 years. Apparently, Cabell definitely wanted to see her because of the confession, because it is unlikely that in these 5 years someone confessed to him. Tirak also kneels beside Saint and promises that he will give his life if she is in danger, so it is his duty. The girl wonders what she should do if the Reaper has truly called her out on her confession. The healer wants to live but not a horrible life together with the Reaper. The paladin says that if Renee is not feeling well, she should rest, while Tirak notices that the girl has turned pale. He tells the commander that the girl feels ill and will not be able to come forward. His life belongs to his wife, but Renee has her fair share. The girl wants to say she has no use for another's life, but she can only thank Tirak for trying to save her from Cabell's attentions. A healer can't avoid Cabell all the time. If she pretends to be sick, and the next time Cabell visits her tent, she might as well be sick. The girl realizes that there's nowhere to hide in the tent, and she's terrified at the realization of her helplessness. It's probably best to confront him while he just wants to do it the easy way. On second thought, maybe this situation also seems strange to Cabell, and maybe he made the same mistake as Renee in thinking he liked the girl. But the heroine isn't even sure if the Black Reaper could get intoxicated and somehow lose self-control. Suddenly, she saw the Black Reaper's black gaze coming toward her. She was startled as she watched Cabell's steady strides toward her. Renee should not behave like a frightened child and must come to her senses in order to speak confidently with Cabell. The heroine guesses that the captain has already realized that she deliberately avoided him. Cabell directly asks Renee, after looking at the people in the camp, why they have to hide their relationship from others. The heroine thought that maybe Cabell was upset about the secrecy of their love. Even though she had confessed to the wrong man, he was still a serious man and clearly wanted to openly declare their relationship. The Reaper's predatory eyes looked at Renee as if to show her the direction to go. Then the man turned and walked away in the direction of the forest. The girl realized that Cabell wanted to talk somewhere else and immediately followed him. For some reason, they went deeper and deeper into the woods, and at first, Renee thought Cabell would say she had to pay for her sins and push her off the cliff. But he adjusted to her leisurely stride. The heroine still couldn't imagine this man really liking her, but how was that even possible? Suddenly, Cabell in front of her tore through the bushes that hid the space ahead. Renee felt a bright light coming from ahead. Her gaze traveled toward the opening. The girl found herself near a mountain lake. The view was so beautiful that it made Renee forget her fear for a moment. She marveled at the beauty of the lake, commenting on it in her voice. Cable asks if Renee likes the lake. The priestess replies that of course she does, and when she looks at the lake, it is as if she is in another world. The girl realizes that this is one of the most beautiful lakes she's ever seen. But then the girl is silenced by the look on Cable's face. She realized that seeing the smile of the Blood Reaper could not deny the fact that he liked her. Cable also wanted to say that he had heard about the girl's poor health, so he gave her his cloak to keep her warm. Renee got embarrassed and says that Tirak must have told Cable about it. The Duke suddenly showed Renee a beautiful look and smiled affectionately, as if he had loved her for a long time. It was as if Cable had always liked her, something she wasn't afraid to ask openly. But when the words came out of her mouth, she was startled that her thoughts had become a real question. The man became more serious and his gaze clearer. Renee starts to make excuses and says it's just that suddenly the guy was very nice to her. But of course that doesn't mean she doesn't like Cable's kindness. In a moment of panic, the girl says that he's never cared for her in this way before, and she feels uncomfortable about talking so much. Cable is sad because that night Renee confessed to him that she liked his thoughtfulness. The girl realized that it was true, for when she had confessed her love, she had mentioned caring. Her heart had never pounded so hard before, and if she was really going to die. But the girl's bad thoughts vanished as she looked closely at the Bloody Reaper's face. The captain of the Imperial Knights couldn't hide the fact that his ears were redder than sunset. After Renee's conversation with Cable, she faced Tirak once more. The giant was shaking with fear and said that there was a black mage in the kingdom, and maybe he cursed their captain and just to Renee to do something about it because she doesn't want to die at the hands of a Bloody Reaper. The girl wondered, did dark magic really exist? Renee also didn't think that Cable would take her actions as a request to keep their relationship a secret. Sometimes the guy would take Renee for a long walk and show her the beautiful scenery. He also said hello every day in the mornings and in the evenings, showing extra care for her. The more Renee thought about that relationship, the sadder she became. But it's a good thing they don't put it on display. One morning, the man greeted Renee as usual and wished her a good morning. Cable's subordinates were immediately frightened when they saw the way their commander behaved from the priestess. The healer was very frightened because she realized that the man was not even trying to hide his emotions on his face. If anyone looked at the Bloody Reaper, they would realize that he was definitely in a relationship with the man he was looking at with such loving eyes. People thought that the commander was bewitched by the Black Mage and were terrified of what was happening, and no one even realized that the Reaper was truly in love for the first time in his life. Renee pondered for 4 days. What to do about all this? She remembered Cable's words when he talked about his getting used to the sound of the girl's breathing, as well as the awkward compliments and encouragement he gave her. The healer blushed at the memory. She realized that if she kept thinking about her relationship with Cable, she wouldn't be able to sleep again. She made the decision that after the confession, Cable had been paying a lot of attention to her. If he found out that the confession wasn't meant for him, Renee was finished, and he would kill her for sure. Lily at this time befriended Gardiel, who was a good paladin and an acquaintance of Renee's. They became friends because they carried Renee when her legs failed. At this time, the heroine herself became friends with Varsi through religion, and he was very happy to meet the saint. It turned out that many of Renee's friends were aristocrats, though she didn't pay much attention to it. Varsi and Gardiel were also from noble families. Lily says that now it's time for them to go back to their normal lives. The priestess realizes that this is all true, but Lily asked her not to dwell on her thoughts and to hurry up, because she would leave without her friend. The healer could not get her confession out of her head, and what she should do with all that happened with Cable. The heroine realizes that there is no time to think about it. At some point, the girl heard a voice behind her, and it was Elvin. They have to talk about what will happen when they get home. In order to talk, the prince decided to go with Renee to the mountains. The girl was not happy that Cable and Elwyn liked to talk in the mountains. Elwyn tells her that he received a reply from the Imperial Court this morning. He says that it looks like a retest of Renee's powers is inevitable, and no matter how much she wants to have to do it. The palace also wrote that Renee will carry the title of saint. The paladin tells us that usually the title of saint is given by the Empire only after an official verification of the candidate's achievements, but so far, it has not been given to clerics of a non-state religion. So the captain thinks they'll need time to discuss Renee's status. The girl once heard about such things from Lily, and all the candidates were saints, and from the main temple. So it was unlikely that she would be one of those important people. Now Rena has to figure out what she is going to do with Cable. Also, in the capital, everyone is waiting for their coming, and there will be a big feast. This means that Renee will also attend the event with the Duke, and their secret relationship will continue. The girl realizes that she is a new saint and a future duchess, so the quiet life can be forgotten. Also, the commander wanted to tell that to lead the procession of warriors will most likely have to Renee. But for a healer who wanted only the peace of life, such a story was very sad. The commander also noticed that Renee had been worrying a lot lately, and if it had anything to do with Captain Cable. Elvin noticed that the guys have been getting closer lately. The heroine, who didn't want to talk about her relationship with Cable, was shocked and tried to deceive the commander-in-chief. The prince thought he must have asked an uncomfortable question for the girl, and his gaze became serious. The healer noticed that the man was not happy, and yet she could not explain her relationship with Cable to the man she loved. Suddenly, the healer felt a rock fall under her foot and she rolled down. But her reflexes had improved of late. So the priestess successfully wrapped her arms around the nearest tree to save herself. Suddenly, she felt the prince's arm around her waist. Renee tries to explain that she's fine and doesn't need to be held so tightly. But for some reason, the commander-in-chief does not let go of the girl and continues to hold her. Suddenly, Renee hears Cable's voice, and she notices that a Black Reaper has appeared behind them. The prince noticed the approaching captain of the Imperial Knights as well. Cable stood behind the boys with clenched teeth and looked aggressively at the prince. He questions why Elwyn is embracing the priestess. The Dark Paladin snatches Renee and takes her aside, then asks his questions again. The prince coldly replies that the priestess tripped and he didn't let her fall. The boys glare menacingly at each other, and the commander-in-chief apologizes if there was a misunderstanding. Cable clenches his teeth furiously, even gritting his teeth. He turns around with the girl and walks away. The healer runs after Cable and apologizes. He must have misunderstood her. The priestess understood that no one would want to catch their beloved in a similar situation with another man, and she understands why Cable wanted to talk about this in private. But the Black Reaper took his lover to the edge of the cliff, which made the girl scared. Cable looked at the abyss below, and Philosopher asked if what the commander-in-chief had said was true. He looks angrily at the healer and demands that the priestess tell him if it is true that there is nothing between them. Renee immediately excuses herself that she has nothing to do with the commander-in-chief, and they are just friends. The girl is scared, but she tells him that she has not talked to the prince about anything serious. The healer decides to ask Cable directly why he's so worried about the prince. The man grudgingly says that he notices Renee constantly looking for the commander-in-chief with her eyes. The healer is startled. She realized that Cable had known about her feelings for Elwyn all along. Cable smiled evilly and asked, did Renee really believe that he wouldn't notice her sweet looks? The man admitted that he only ever looks at Renee, and of course he could notice where she was looking in those moments. So the captain has long since seen that Renee has a soft spot for their commander-in-chief and seeks him out among the other paladins. Cable asks that Renee say it's not true. The girl approaches the cliff and suspects that apparently the Blood Reaper wants her to confess her true feelings. But if the girl says she doesn't love Elwyn, Cable won't believe her words. The only thing the girl can say now is a slightly edited truth. The girl is quick to say that commander-in-chief first love. In fact, Renee wasn't lying when she said that. Also, the heroine says that she used to like Elvin, but it was unrequited love and now it's all in the past. Now she only loves Cable. But she realizes that she doesn't really love Cable sincerely enough to declare it. She has to say such things because of the danger she is in. But Cable remains cold and wonders if Renee's words are true. Why the girl doesn't take her eyes off him. The girl suggests that perhaps the reason is simple and the affection remains. Renee needed to say something more plausible, but at this moment she couldn't think of something better, so she says goodbye to her life because most likely the Blood Reaper won't believe her words. But when Renee saw Cable's face, she realized that it was too early to say goodbye to her life because the man was looking at her with a completely different look. The Blood Reaper, and fear of all enemies of the Empire, apologizes to Renee saying that he was wrong. But still, the hero wonders why Renee's affection doesn't fade even when her new love is near. The healer, who has already buried herself deep enough, has no right to back down and keeps lying that she's trying to overcome the attachment, but not everything happens so fast. Cable smiles and you can see he believes the protagonist. He leans over the priestess and promises that he will help her overcome the past feeling, and his nose touches the girl's face. Renee feels the touch of Cable's ticklish hair, and his breath is nice and warm. She could not control her body, and from the man's abrupt approach she blushed and became shy. The girl pushed the too abrupt Duke away from her. The Duke remains calm and asks, "Doesn't Renee really want this?" Apparently the hero is hinting at a kiss. The healer confesses that, to be honest, her heart leaps out of her chest from intimacy with the guy. The Duke promises he'll wait for the girl to get used to the feeling. Soon, it's day to return to the capital, but there's a dispute in the warrior camp. The commander-in-chief and his paladins wanted the saint to be present with them at the beginning of the column and to ride on Elwin's horse. But the Imperial Knights, together with their commander Duke, were against it, because Renee did not belong to the main religion of the Empire to which the paladins belonged, and also Cable was more suitable for the role of escort, because he did not belong to any religion. Renee watched with a smile the argument between the two commanders of their army. She realized that both men were right, but she could not stand up for either of them. Elvin continues to argue for his choice, because although they worship different gods, the essence of their religion is very similar, and they, as believers, are more alike. Also, the relationship between their temples is not so bad, so if he accompanies the novice, the Empire will turn a blind eye to the differences of religions. But inside himself, Elvin could not understand how Cable was related to Renee, and why he wanted to be with her at the procession in the center of the Empire. Tirak was frightened because their commander had truly decided to accompany Renee and had gotten into an argument with the head of the paladins. Gregory was afraid that if the commander drew his sword, a war between the two units might break out. Renee realizes that the only thing Cable can say in this dispute is about his connection to her temple, and then he can have a negotiating bonus for escorting the saint. But Cable pays a lot of money to hide his connection to her temple and is their main sponsor. But then, Renee completely loses her temper, for Cable confesses that he has been frequenting Renee's temple for 3 years. Now the Duke's privacy has been shattered. Just now, all the money the Duke had been paying was going nowhere. Commander Cable's soldiers couldn't believe what they were hearing. They thought their leader didn't believe in God. Gregory turns to the healer and he directly asks if Cable's words are true, because this is the first time he hears about their commander's visit to the temple. Some people think that Cable is terminally ill, so he didn't tell the soldiers about his problems. Renee looks at Cable's face to analyze his behavior. She hesitantly says that she knows the reason why the Duke visited their temple. But at that moment, Elwin also turns his attention to the clergywoman, and serious tension hangs in the air. The heroine practically did not lie when she said that the Duke wanted to find balance and peace of mind as well as silence. The temple gave the necessary services to its client. The girl got support from Lily, who realized that Renee had chosen the lesser of evils. Cable had to press her penetrating gaze on Renee to get her to agree to be more serious. The healer realized she had no choice, so she approached Cable and said that because of the above reasons she would ride the horse with Mr. Cable. The commander-in-chief couldn't find words to comment on what he saw, and he felt kind of sad. Renee realized that from now on, she was under the dark spell of Imperial Captain Cable, who was influencing her decision. When the army visited the capital of the Empire with a victory, all the citizens went out into the street and looked out the windows to see the glorious heroes that came to them with the victory. They greeted the commander-in-chief Elwin, who had led the campaign. One of the women held out flowers to the novice to thank her for the peaceful end of the war. The healer was surprised by such praise from the ordinary townsfolk, but accepted their gifts and blessings. But there was also one disadvantage, because Renee forgot for a moment that she was on a horse with Cable, who tried to calm the girl, saying that he would not let her fall off the horse and would hold her tightly. One of the girls was even afraid of the terrible Bloody Reaper who was riding with the beautiful priestess. One of the women asked the child's mother to calm the child down, because the Blood Reaper might get angry. Renee could also see the Emperor himself, and this time she saw him up close. The girl even thought she was in a dream. After all, she couldn't believe that such an important person would meet her in person. Cable tells the priestess that further their journey will be on foot and gets off the horse. The Duke watched with a smile as the healer climbs down from the horse, worrying as always that she might fall. He holds out his palm to help the girl. Renee was afraid of the horse, but with the Duke's help she got down safely. As she descended, she realized that behind them, the crowd had stopped cheering, and the dead silence had returned. The girl instinctively felt that the Blood Reaper's apparent courtesy had struck a chord with the people that had never seen him kind, and he even gently lifted a rose petal from the priestess's head. One of the women in the crowd thought that apparently their saint was able to charm even the Bloody Reaper. Renee heard the crowd discussing her relationship with Cable and realized that she could no longer hide her feelings for the Duke. Renee also returned safely to her small temple and decided to visit the head priest to complain because he had promised a quiet war. The man said that Renee had returned safely and he was grateful to God that Renee was well. But then a servant came into the room and said that the priest should look at the documents he had received. The girl saw that Renee was just scolding their boss and greeted her affectionately. The priestess tells the protagonist that all these pieces of paper are sponsorship letters, and for the last 2 days, they have received more money than for the last 5 years. The heroine realized that apparently her miracle has brought more money to the temple than a direct award to the healer from the state. Since the saint had received recognition from His Majesty, their small temple had become very popular. The healer also attended the tests of divine power that Elvin spoke about, and the girl overdid it by destroying the orb that was supposed to analyze her energy. Before the girl could even rest, she realized that soon the day of the reception would begin, and she would be surrounded by aristocrats. There would be a large number of important people coming to such a feast. Lily says that the war has just ended, so Renee could stay in the temple for a rest, and everyone would understand. Why did the girl decide to do that since she made the biggest contribution to ending it? But the healer says that she was personally invited by the emperor and she can hardly refuse to attend such an important event. One of the girls who was also taken in as an orphan and raised in the temple asked Renee, "Are the rumors not false about her relationship with the Blood Reaper?" People whisper that Renee has charmed the most feared Blood Reaper in the empire. They say that the Duke visited the temple for 3 years, and it was Renee who saved him in the war, and the girl also knew that Renee left for easy money. But she had also managed to capture the Duke's heart. The girls also wondered if Lily had found any of the knights during the war. Later, Renee was dressed up in the best way for the reception, because she had to be a saint and look shrewd and beautiful. In order to dress Renee, she was sent to the Duke's estate as the main sponsor of their temple. She had been invited in while the healer was hanging clothes, and a beautiful carriage pulled up, and some man got out and said he had been sent to help the girl choose a dress for a party to celebrate the end of the war. She would be accompanying the Duke, and so he decided to get busy decorating her. Lily, who also decided to visit the duchy, was shocked that the dress Renee was given was more expensive than a month's salary of priests. But looking at the price tags, Renee realized that Lily even underestimated, because for a year of work, they could afford to buy only one of these beautiful dresses. Apparently, Renee would wear a year's salary right on her body. Lily noticed that Renee liked the Duke, and she could make him fall in love with her to enjoy the benefits of a rich man for the rest of his life. After all, the girl dreamed of becoming an unemployed rich woman and work little, as well as row gold with a shovel and catch luck by the tail. Lily told in great detail about Renee's dream, and she even shuddered at the realization of it. The healer wondered about Lily's words and whether she wanted to make the Duke fall in love with her even more. But remembering the look of love, Cabal heroine realized that he already adores her with all his heart, and apparently she can no longer fall in love with the man. If Lily had seen his face, she would have realized it herself. Rena is afraid that if the truth is revealed, the man will look at her with a completely different look, and then she does not know how events will unfold. Her life is already too carefree, and she has to be careful not to lose it. In that case, Lily says that Renee could wait for the Duke's feelings to cool down and get rid of him, if the girl doesn't want to live with him. The healer still doesn't know why she's attracted to Cable, but they're from different worlds, so she'll probably get bored of the Duke quickly. All she has to do is wait. She's trying to keep her hopes up. The Duke's butler says they are done with the preparations and would like to ask if the novice can dance. The girl interjects. Does the butlers inquire specifically about ballroom dancing? If she has to dance like the aristocrats from the movies she watched in her past life, she won't be able to do it. The healer can just step on the Duke's foot, and she stands very badly even in heels. After a while, the Duke returned to his domain to greet his guests. Renee noticed his attire and realized that the man must have been doing business with the Imperial Knights if he was in their uniform. Cable asks his lover if she has chosen a dress to her liking. Lily nudges her friend in the Duke's direction, and Renee for some reason is nervous about talking to Cable as well. Lily leans on her friend and says that she is about to take the butler away and asks that Renee not lose the chance. But the main character doesn't even have time to wonder what Lily is talking about, as she immediately decides to take the butler to the library away from the lovers. Cable says that if Renee doesn't like the dress the butler and her friend picked out for her, he can order her to change it immediately. He will give her whatever she wants and she only has to ask for it. The healer was surprised. Would the Duke seriously give her anything she wanted? The Duke suspects that apparently Renee does not like the dress. But the girl immediately justifies the choice of her friend, saying that the dress is just wonderful. The heroine confesses that in truth, she is not worried about the beauty of her dress, but that she does not want to stand out at the celebration because she is shy of aristocrats. The captain smiles and asks his beloved not to worry about such trifles, because he will be there to help with everything. Cable also tells her that the first dance is very simple, and the clergywoman will learn it quickly. The heroine, who is hoping she wouldn't have to dance, is scared. Cable says that they will dance anyway, but the saddest part is that the girl may be invited by other guys, which makes his look demonic again. The healer tries to calm the guy down by saying that she will only learn one dance and she won't be able to dance the others, so there's no need to worry. The captain calmed down and immediately smiled. The girl was surprised. Would she now have to calm her partner all the time? The heroine also guessed that maybe Cable wanted to teach her to dance if she had not been shown her teacher before. But it was obvious to the Duke, and he was going to teach the girl from the beginning. Cable tells her that the woman Renee has seen before will teach her the basic rules after the girl will practice with Cable. After all, they will be dancing together at the opening of the ball. The healer imagines in her head how she will dance with the Duke, and she was scared of the closeness with the Bloody Reaper. After all, they will exchange awkward glances and press against each other, and maybe the guy will even hold her by the waist, from which she will just be confused. In her plans, Renee wanted as gently as possible to end the relationship with the Duke, and in order to do it as best as possible, the most important thing is not to create romantic memories. If she will not dance with him, then everything will be much easier. But Cable says that Renee should not worry and that he will help her with all her difficulties at any moment. He gently takes his lady's hand in a show of reverence and care. The heroine thought at that moment that he would kiss her hand, but the guy did not do it, and the girl felt only a light breath of a man. Cable kept his word and gave the healer a chance to get used to his care so that she did not worry. When the day of the event came, Renee went on stage with Cable and did a welcome dance. Many people called her saint and showed her a lot of attention because of her miracle with which the girl ended the war. But there were also dissatisfied, and one of the girls in the crowd said that this girl was just a commoner, and people thought that she was a saint, even though she was not. The woman who stood next to the girl says that the past saint was also of lowly origin. The empire, as in the past, is in for a huge change. But suddenly there is silence in the hall because Renee says that she is not a saint yet. She said that she was only following the teachings of her God and did not want the popularity that the status of saint gives. People were pleased that Renee was very modest. The girl's words only increased her popularity among the assembled aristocrats. The heroine realized that she was now at the first ball in her life, and the magnificent outfits and the bright candlelight blinded her. The brighter it shone, the more she wanted to go home. The Duke told the heroine that the most important thing is to dance the first dance, and the following is not necessary, so she should not worry. When the healer danced with Cable, it was a miracle she didn't step on his feet. She was glad that she didn't let her partner down. The healer was also very disgusted that every person at the event was trying to get to know her and create a bond between them in order to have contact with the future saint. To top it all off, Cable is constantly around and trying to show his concern for Renee. The Duke notices that the girl is clearly tired, and he suggests moving to a quieter place. The heroine agrees to Cable's suggestion. She tried to restrain herself because the face of the hero was incredibly beautiful, and she tried not to fall in love with him. The Duke had been smiling lately, only to her, and showed a lot of tenderness from which the girl's heart burst out of her chest. She tried to remember the predatory gaze of the Bloody Reaper to return to her head sobriety of mind. 10 days ago, Renee had drunkenly confessed her love for the infamous Cable. She missed her chance to explain herself a long time ago and is now just waiting for the Duke to get all worked up and dump her on his own. Cable tells her with a smile that it's windy. It's beautiful today, but he'd like to ask his companion if she's too cold. The girl sweetly replies that at least winter is coming, but the wind is still nice enough. But suddenly the conversation is interrupted by the people who wanted to talk from Cable. The healer saw people who remotely resembled her companion, and apparently they were Cable's relatives. The hero was immediately angered by the presence of his relatives. Renee thought she could relax in the silence of the balcony, but now she could see that her partner could, at any moment, grab the throats of the people who entered because of anger. Cable gave Renee a cold look and promised that he would be back soon. The heroine thought Cable wouldn't waste time with the relatives, but he turned out to be more tactful. Suddenly, Tirak, whom Renee had saved in the war, appeared as if out of nowhere. He glittered in his golden jacket and said that the girl was simply adorable in her new dress. Tirak asked Renee to stay with them until the commander returned. The girl thought that perhaps Tirak meant the other knights of Cable's squad. But Tirak says that he promised to introduce Renee to his relatives because she saved his life. Tirak's wife comes to the balcony, and she was very grateful to the novice Renee for saving her husband's life. Tirak's wife's name was Neon, and she is known for her beauty, and it is said that anyone who looks at her will fall in love. The healer says that she is very pleased to meet Neon, and she has heard a lot about her that the woman works in the library of the Empire. The knight's wife smiles and says that, did her husband tell her about her during the campaign? Tirak says that she and Renee have talked a lot. The healer admits that it was her first time in the war, so she was constantly inconvenienced, and thanks to Sir Tirak, she was able to return safely, and is sure that Neon was worried, so she wants the woman to accept a sincere apology for the fact that the knight protecting the healers almost died. Neon hit Tirak with all her strength, causing the man to fly off to the side. The healer couldn't believe that a great warrior and a giant could fly away so easily from a woman's hand. Neon was shocked that Tirak had not told her about his serious injury. She had no idea he might have died in the war. Renee could blame herself for Tirak's death for the rest of her life, and she can't understand what kind of vice commander of an elite knight squad he is, and how he allows himself to be seriously wounded. Neon forces Tirak to apologize to Renee for almost dying in front of the saint. But the girl says it's okay, and she repaid the kindness of Sir Tirak, who brought her sleeping pills, and he always helped her during her hikes. Neon says she can't even believe her husband was so caring, so she forgives him. Tirak feels that he can change the topic of conversation and save his life, so he says that the commander has changed after talking to Renee, and his black magic has become weaker, which makes the warriors of their squad feel much safer around the commander. Renee was saddened by the words she heard. 10 days had passed since her confession. She recalls the beautiful days when Cable took her to the mountain lake and told her how he felt. He promised that he would do for her everything that the girl asked, also reassured and asked Renee not to worry. The heroine cannot believe that because of her relationship with the captain, his character has changed so much. Renee felt that emotions overwhelmed her and wanted to be alone, but Tirak did not let her go and said that the commander ordered him to protect Renee while he was not around and to watch that everything was in order. After all, at the ball, pesky nobles might say something to Renee and Tirak has to keep watch. Renee might be surprised, but the commander had ordered Tirak to keep an eye on her at all times and bring her to him if necessary. But Neon, who realized that the girl seriously needed some alone time, hit her husband again to stop him from bothering the lady. When Renee was finally able to be alone, she realized that she just didn't want to take the responsibility to confess the falsity of her feelings to Cable. She regrets every day, but is too afraid of the reaction to her revelation. When Renee returns to the temple, she has to do something to live, or she could ruin her whole life. Suddenly, the heroine heard that someone is going up the stairs, and she was surprised because now the ball is in full swing and this way leads only upstairs. Near the girl is the beautiful Commander-in-Chief Elvin, who smiles at his friend. Meanwhile, Cable's relatives say that the prince probably wants to collect all the glory during the war for himself. Until Cable officially becomes a duke, he will continue to be neglected. The duchy has been without a head for a long time, and Cable must assume the role of master to finally appropriate the power and take glory for himself. The time has come and Cable must take his rightful place and lead the rest of the nobles into a brighter future while not allowing any princes to neglect him. Cable's father wanted him to be great, but unfortunately his son doesn't show any ambition, and the royal family twists him around as they please. They don't understand how long the Duke will tolerate this attitude to himself and when he's still power in his hands. Cable realizes that his relatives have not changed at all, and it annoys him. They're trying to sit on 2 chairs. They're looking to capitalize wherever they can. If it were his older brother instead of Cable, maybe things would be different. For a moment, a memory of his childhood and his mother appeared in front of Cable's eyes. It also seemed to him as if his older brother was standing in the crowd of aristocrats. The man immediately closed his eyes to avoid seeing hallucinations that were caused by strong emotions of pain and suffering. One of the relatives says there's another problem because there's a rumor about Cable, the novice, and the prince. If it's true, Cable should take matters into her own hands. But the hero is already annoyed by the behavior of his relatives. He wants this conversation to end quickly, and it's the priestess thing that's been bugging him the most. The woman who brought it up with Renee is scared, but still, she realizes that this insolent puppy has no idea thanks to whom he took the place of the head of the family. One of the smarter relatives decided to lead his kin away, and at the same time said that apparently the Duke has not yet recovered after a hard war, and he needed some time to rest. As the woman left, she quietly said that the ruling dynasty and the Holy One were intertwined. Cable paused to dry his relative's words. The aunt says that her nephew knows better than anyone what the royal family really represents, and their intentions regarding the saints are quite obvious. The aunt wants to give advice, and when it's too late, regret won't fix anything. At this time, the prince was already beside Renee. The girl said hello to the commander-in-chief, but she can't believe she ran into a paladin in such a quiet place by chance. Perhaps the prince wanted to visit the tower to meditate, but during the ball he looked completely different and was friendly with the ladies around him. She said she had gone out for some air, but did not expect to see her acquaintance here. Elvin smirked and approached the girl. Renee realizes that she has failed to get Elwin to talk, and she decides to change the topic of conversation, saying that the moon today is just wonderful, and asks what the prince might think about it. But the man remains silent and does not answer the girl's questions. Renee does not understand why his sly look does not change, and why he will not say at least a word. She decides that perhaps the paladin does not want to talk to her, and so the healer decides to say goodbye and leave. But she also realizes that if she leaves, there will be no other chance to talk to the prince. The healer was no longer able to think calmly because the frowning commander-in-chief immediately blocked her path, not allowing her to go down the stairs. The girl was frightened, but she could not believe that Elvin could do such a harsh thing to her and frighten her. Cable could certainly do something like that, but Elvin was a completely different person. The prince quietly replies to the girl that the dress suits her very well. He wondered, was it really a gift from the Duke? The healer sensed a strange tension between them, and the question was quite sudden. Renee realizes that it is true, because the dress was bought by Cable, though the designers were her friend and butler. The priestess does not want to talk about Cable in the presence of the prince, but for some reason the commander-in-chief asked about him. The girl says she has only seen the prince dressed as a paladin cleric, but she has never seen him in dark clothes, though they suit him well too. But the principal comes closer and closer, leaving the girl frightened. Elwin says he may be wrong, but he's completely confused. He thought Renee liked him, but at some point she started paying all her attention to Cable's sphere. The prince openly asks, is the priestess also in a relationship with the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Knights? But Elvin does not let the girl answer and comes closer and closer to her. He quietly leans over the healer's face and suggests that she betray Cable, but Renee pulls away from the prince's arms. Elwin wonders if she doesn't love him. The healer realizes that Elwin knows her feelings, but she has no joy now. Renee is sure she loved Elwin's comfort and tender care. He treated her as his own person and called her selfishness the most altruistic thing in the world. The healer really thought she had feelings for the prince. The girl openly asks him if Elvin likes her. The man wonders why this question. The healer explains that the commander-in-chief has always been kind to her and cared more than the others. She is truly grateful and still doesn't know if Elvin cared, just for that or because he cared about her. The girl looks carefully at the prince's face. She thinks about what will happen if their possible relationship is known, and if people will pressure the crown prince to take responsibility, and most likely all the burden of responsibility will go to the poor priestess, and would he offer the girl he loves to cheat on her partner? Renee realizes that if the prince does not love her, then there must be another reason why he is trying to get her. Now the war is over, and the commander-in-chief has no reason to care about Renee's energy. Apparently, she is still the key for the prince to achieve his goals. His terrifying laughter was akin to madness. Elvin suggests that Renee is his key to his cherished dream that will allow the prince to become great. The girl was frightened by his words. She was terrified of the prince's true identity. Now the healer has not even the slightest desire to remain in the company of the commander-in-chief, so she asks to leave. But as the healer leaves, the prince says that it is still true, and he treated her as a means to an end, but realized that at some point he stopped thinking of her in that way. For a moment, it seemed to the paladin that they were similar, and their methods and goals were quite similar. Elwin explains that the novice doesn't realize who he method or purpose is for herself. He also believes that Renee rejected his proposal because of her fear of the Duke, which made the girl choke. If Elwin can read minds, he tried to convince the girl not to worry about the Duke. But Renee didn't agree with the prince because she wouldn't be a moth to a flame. But the paladin won't back down and says that Renee should not be afraid and the light will shine over them wallpaper. He asks that the girl ponder his proposal. The heroine knew that Cabell and Elwin are not on the best of terms, but they turned out to be like light and shadow. In terms of strength, both knights are equal to each other. The commander of the Imperial Knights is the future ruler of his own ducal land and vast as well as fertile land, while the prince is the future emperor, which is saying a lot. The girl realizes that she has spent all this time in the temple preparing for a peaceful and lazy existence and did not know about the games between the aristocrats that have been going on behind her back all this time. But suddenly the healer heard a familiar voice, and if it was Cabell who had come to her. The girl turned around and saw her Duke who had found the girl. Cabell asked his beloved with a smile, "What is she doing in such a dark and lonely place?" She recalls the prince's predatory face and says that she was admiring the moon and will never tell the Duke about her meeting with Elwin. The healer also asked Cabell not to punish Tirak, for she had asked to be alone. The girl did not notice how boldly she took Cabell's hand. Renee did not immediately guess why he looked at her so strangely. The Duke was very pleased with the behavior of his beloved and offers to admire the moon together. The healer does not know how to tell her the truth about her feelings, if the man is happy, even in small things, spending time with her. The priestess refused to look at the moon together from the Duke's, and the man nodded understandingly. He thinks it's okay to go home now, because this is the first time the healer has attended such a high-profile event. Apparently he thinks her mood is so bad due to fatigue. Renee finds it very disgusting and unpleasant to be deceived by a man. He truly loves her, but for some reason she's holding out and not telling him she confessed to the wrong man. The healer decides to ask Cabell why he fell in love with her. The Duke's words would help the girl sort out her feelings, and now the Duke's answer will influence her final decision. Cabell tells that sleep is comparable to death and losing consciousness. He slowly sinks into a bloody darkness. But when he opens his eyes, he always sees the priestess who soothes him with her light. Her smile, as well as her kind heart and desire to help everyone, gave hope to the Duke. She bravely carried out her duties as a novice and never gave up. Cabell loves her for everything because Renee is perfect. She is the one who gives happiness by her existence. After a week, Renee returned to her normal life and worked at the temple healing the needy. And because of her popularity, many clients came to the small temple. Also, a royal messenger came to their temple and said that the emperor had decided to adopt the small faith of healer Renee as a religion of national importance. The emperor has also decided to support the building of a new temple for the followers of Renee's religion. The healer was tired all the time and found it very difficult. Lily, meanwhile, wanted to participate in the selection process for the Healers Guild. Members of the Healers Guild are equal to nobles and are sometimes even given a title for special rewards. In addition, members of the Healers Guild receive an additional donation from the empire and temples that have raised such people, additionally get more popularity. It turns out that becoming a member of the Healers Guild is the best hope for those people who want to be rich and powerful. However, the heroine does not want to be a member of the Healers Guild at all. Lily, unlike Renee, was motivated to become a member of the Healers Guild because as a child she was saved from a monster by a member of the guild. Renee also realizes that if she joins the guild, she will have to deal with monsters and she doesn't want that. Monster wounds can't be healed by normal means, and only divine healers can help. One of the main tasks of the members of the Healers Guild is to accompany the Holy Knights on monster-slaying campaigns. But sometimes even Imperial Knights have to accompany them on their monster-slaying campaigns. In the recent war, Renee almost died of fright, and she doesn't understand why she has to volunteer to see monsters and human suffering all the time. She knows that she has to help people, but she does it well within the walls of the temple. But the sad news is that because of the status of saint that they want to give Renee, she will probably be involved in all future wars, and so she is already unhappy. The head of the minor religion clerics told Renee that the healers protect the guild's followers with special care, and Renee will also be able to learn the complex healing magic and protective spells. The healer knew that protection magic was a type of magic that helped protect the healers or his allies. Usually only mages practice defense or attack magic, but the Healers Guild trains even priests in defense magic. Mages and healers cooperate in the guild, and it helps to create a new spell. One of the best spells is the Blessing. It increases a knight's attack power or speed. It also increases the innate healing abilities. This kind of magic is like the miracle Renee performed, only smaller. For Renee, this kind of magic could be useful because she will most likely participate in the wars, and the guild magic will allow her to become more protected. It would be difficult for the priest without his healers, but he would be happy for Renee and Lily to join the guild. But the heroine asked her father not to worry, and she can't just leave the temple she calls home. After the conversation from the main priest, Renee went to the library. On the way, the girl thought that her dream of living an ordinary life in which she does not have to do anything burst, like a soap bubble. On the street on the way to the library, Renee was met by new priests, and they were orphans who had been picked up by the richer-than-before organization of the small temple. The healer thanked the children for helping with the chores. The heroine realized that she had to find a way to survive. She recalled the first time she met Cable, the day he came to the temple for services.